Good afternoon and welcome to working session 7 entitled Fundamental Freedoms 1, including freedom of thought, conscience, religion or belief. My name is Kishan Manocha and I'm the Senior Advisor on Freedom of Religion or Belief at ODIHR, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to what we very much hope and trust will be a productive, dynamic session where we will be exploring the fascinating and challenging area of freedom of religion or belief and security. Yes, I recognize a point of order from Kazakhstan.
Thank you, moderator. I have to complain on the insulting behavior against me of Mr. Sitnikov, who is the representative of the Open Dialogue Foundation. During the break, Mr. Sitnikov approached me, intruded into my personal space, pulled up his iPhone, and began making a video of me, began interrogating me, urging me to confess that I should be ashamed of my official statement during previous sessions. I'm the head of the official delegation of the government of Kazakhstan. How dared he to behave so ignoramously, and being the age of my younger son? I'm sure that Mr. Sitnikov will spread video of me in the social nets and be boasting and bragging how brave he is. I demand from the ODIHR and security services to protect me from any further possible acts of violence against me by the representative of the Open Dialogue Foundation, the name of which means dialogue, but not the interrogation and insulting behavior. Thank you.
Thank you for raising that. It's not a matter that we can take in this session, as the session is devoted to the topic of freedom of religion or belief, but your point and your concern has been noted, and we will apprise our security at ODIHR of the concern that you've raised. Thank you for raising that. Anyway, as I was saying, this is a session dedicated to a discussion of freedom, religion or belief and security, and we will have until 6 o'clock for this purpose. The way that we will proceed is that after my introductory remarks and some technical information, we will hear from our introducer, Dr. Ahmed Shahid, and this will be followed by 2 hours and 15 minutes of interventions from the floor. There is a speakers list, and we'll proceed down that list in due course. The final 15 minutes or so will be dedicated to rights of reply, if there are any rights of reply from OSCE participating states. And if there is time, we will also hear some final concluding comments from Dr. Shahid, and after that, I will close the session. I'm just finding out whether the list is closed or it is still open. The list is closed, so we've reached the limit of 50 participants. As you've heard before, seats in the plenary hall are designated as indicated on the signs around the table. We'd be grateful if all participants would respect the seating arrangements throughout this session. I should also say that live streaming of HDIM is available. Filming with cameras and video cameras is only permitted by accredited journalists and only during the opening and closing plenary sessions. No other audiovisual recordings should be undertaken without the explicit permission of the individuals being recorded. Well, it gives me great pleasure to introduce Dr. Ahmed Shahid, who will be known to many of you. Dr. Shahid is a very distinguished international human rights expert, has served the cause of international human rights in a variety of capacities. As an academic, he is a lecturer currently at the School of Law. He's a lecturer in human rights at the School of Law at the University of Essex in the United Kingdom. But during his 2 periods of service as the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Maldives, Dr. Shahid made a notable contribution to the strengthening of the international human rights system. Of course, he's gone on to distinguish himself even further by serving in the capacities of the UN Special Rapporteur on the human rights situation in Iran, and for the past few years, since November 2016, as the UN Special Rapporteur on freedom of religion or belief. And he's one of, I think, only a handful of individuals to have served in 2 UN Special Procedures capacities. So we're thrilled and delighted to welcome Dr. Shahid here, and we'll be hearing from him now. Over to you, Dr. Shahid.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I would like to begin by thanking ODIHR for inviting me to speak at this afternoon session of the HDIM. The relationship between freedom of religion or belief and security is a complex one, recognized in the founding documents of the OSCE and in various ministerial decisions. It is widely acknowledged today that where freedom of religion or belief is violated, security will be undermined. Viewed through the lens of comprehensive security, a concept pioneered by the OSCE, violations of freedom of religion or belief pose threats to security at all levels of analysis, be they personal, societal, national, regional, or indeed international. The International Human Rights Framework protects those manifestations of religion or belief, including non-belief, that do not threaten public safety, order, health, or morals, that do not incite violence or discrimination, and that do not violate the rights and freedoms of others, including security of person. These standards also affirm that religious intolerance and discrimination, as stated in the 1981 UN Declaration, is not only an affront to human dignity, but also a threat to peace and security. It is indeed respect for freedom of religion or belief that sets the plural context in which democracy can thrive and human rights can be enjoyed. Protecting freedom of religion or belief thus requires states to respect a range of other human rights, such as freedoms of expression, association, and peaceful assembly, the rights of minorities, the right to non-discrimination, and the prohibition of incitement to violence, to name a few. Violations of freedom of religion or belief can be experienced at a personal level or at societal level. Attacks on houses of worship not only harm the communities targeted, but can have widespread impact on the whole society and indeed across national borders. Violence in the name of religion has made several countries view religion as a source of extremism and violence. What has resulted across many regions is a securitization of religion by viewing religion as a security threat and restricting even legitimate manifestations of religion or belief. This approach misses an important insight that without respect for human rights, societies cannot achieve sustainable peace, an insight that the OSCE has always demonstrated. Securitization compounds the problem for the state by taking the path of religious intolerance and discrimination. It can result in overly broad laws which can alienate whole communities, contribute to civilian discontent, and increasing radicalization. Without community support for the work of law enforcement, opportunities for early detection of threats are diminished. Cooperation from the community is vital for effective preventive action. Of course, engagement with religious communities and fashioning appropriate policies for the state to build trust is easier said than done. I would like to highlight further 3 aspects that can further complicate this challenge. First are common misconceptions associated with the right to freedom of religion or belief. A second is the nature of the state's relationship with religion. And a third is the impact of emerging technologies. Conceptual misconstructions can lead to suppression of freedom of religion or belief, or to abuses based on religion or belief. Many countries try to shield religion from criticism. Where there is no space for critical debate, extremist interpretations of religious texts can go unchallenged. This can provide fertile ground to breed violent extremism. Another misconception centers on state obligation in regard to speech that incites violence against others. Very often, those states that punish speech critical of the majority religion will allow impunity for speech that incites violence against religious minorities, which in many cases can lead to actual violence and lawlessness. Religion is frequently invoked in support of practices that harm women and sexual minorities. It must be stressed that human rights framework does not protect such practices. The nature of the relationship between the state and religion impacts on the ability of state to address these challenges. At one extreme, when the state takes a posture of hostility towards religion, the exercise of any rights linked to freedom of religion or belief may be met with repression. Typically, all civil liberties are suppressed. Many such states paradoxically continue to face religious extremism. They are often incapable of relying on religious resources to contest and expose extremist discourses. There is no marketplace of ideas, and there is no religious literacy to mobilize against extremist discourses. At the other extreme, the state adopts and enforces a religion. Here again, there are serious violations of freedom of religion or belief, and the politicization of religion provides a one-way street to violent extremism. Emergent technologies, such as artificial intelligence, can increase the repressive capacity of states by eroding privacy, threatening freedoms of peaceful assembly and association, and undermining identity. Digital footprints can be used to deduce one's religious practices or beliefs. These technologies can manipulate information, spread disinformation, or propagate extremist ideologies. Certain recent acts of terrorism have highlighted the links between social media platforms and violent extremism. These challenges call for attention on how and when the state may legitimately invoke the limitations regime provided for under international law on the manifestation of religion or belief. Given the importance of taking a preventive approach, some states have imposed laws that are vague and that enable state intervention at the earliest possible time. Overly broad laws weaken human rights safeguards in law enforcement. The worst such practice is when preventive approaches are themselves securitized and militarized without a holistic approach to security and safety. So what can we do? The legal framework will insist on legality, necessity, proportionality, and accountability of responses, which are, of course, essential. In addition, the comprehensive security approach can inspire creative responses, especially in offering guidance on what has now emerged as the whole society approach to prevention of violent extremism. These can include fostering societal inclusion and participation. This will require that state respect the right of all individuals to enjoy their right to freedom of religion or belief in peace and without discrimination. It will also require the state to play the role of an impartial guarantor of everyone's right to freedom of religion or belief. Where the state is an impartial guarantor, there will be greater likelihood of upholding the rule of law and fostering independent institutions that can promote trust and civic engagement. Where there is respect for freedom of expression, there would be a marketplace of ideas where extremist ideologies can be challenged and exposed. Notions of common security can assist to promote broad coalitions and inclusive alliances, which in turn can foster social cohesion and build bridges across nations. It will also require state respect various rights linked to freedom of religion or belief, such as freedom of movement and of association. A comprehensive security approach will also mean that states are also mindful of horizontal inequalities and promote social and economic rights. The UN Sustainable Development Agenda, the SDGs, have an important tagline, leaving no one behind. Where freedom of religion or belief is not respected, then minorities will not enjoy equal access to education or health or justice or other services, nor achieve the goal of gender equality. In conclusion, I want to reiterate the multifaceted nature of the relationship between freedom of religion or belief and security, and stress the urgency of facilitating understandings and practices that recognize the synergies and symbiosis between these two sets of public interests. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Shahid, for your opening remarks, for reminding us of the multifaceted relationship between freedom of religion or belief and security, and reminding us, more importantly, of the fact that in the OSCE, we have a comprehensive approach to security, which is one of the distinguishing features of our organization and our work, and provides a very helpful lens within which to view this interrelationship, but also, as you say, to think creatively about the practical strategies that can advance both freedom of religion or belief for all and genuine security needs. And indeed, this session has been designed or conceived as a space now for everyone to think about the principles and the examples of good practices that can help participating states frame gender-sensitive laws and policies and practices to advance freedom of religion or belief and security. So we look forward to your comments and recommendations in this regard. Now, as far as this session is concerned, we have a full speakers list, we have limited time, and we have set the time for contributions to 2.5 minutes, 2 minutes, 30 seconds. And I will be strict with that. I know that will disappoint a number of you who are used to speaking for 3 minutes or longer in certain sessions or in previous sessions, but we don't have time to go beyond 2 minutes, 30 seconds per intervention. I should also remind participants that they can only speak in the capacity in which they are registered, and only entities registered on the speakers list can take the floor. That we would encourage all interventions to be orderly, respectful of the time, and to the point, on topic, I should say, and starting with recommendations related to the session's topic. And also, while we, of course, welcome criticism, particularly constructive criticism, I should say, we very much hope and trust that the discussions will be conducted in a respectful and courteous manner in line with relevant OSCE commitments and, of course, the Code of Conduct, which we have all signed up. And also that participating states who wish to raise a point of order should bear in mind that those points of order should touch on and relate to only procedural issues. If you do have a pre-prepared statement, please do submit it to the documents distribution desk so that it can be processed further. And we, as always, do not encourage the reading of such statements. We prefer spontaneity, creativity, and thinking in a natural, spontaneous way. Anyway, that's enough from me. We will now open the floor to contributions, and we will start with the Baha'i International Community, and then will be followed by the Order of St. Andrew. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. My name is Noura Detweiler from the Baha'i International Community Brussels office, which represents the worldwide Baha'i faith community to the European institutions. We seek to create spaces in which different actors can come together, challenge their assumptions, and find a common understanding on topics as diverse as social cohesion, peace, development, drivers of migration, the role of religion in society, artificial intelligence, as well as freedom of religion or belief. We believe that one key element in upholding FORB for All is to encourage various religious or belief and non-belief communities to do their utmost to get to know and find ways to work with each other. Often individuals belonging to one community are ignorant of the profundity of thought and belief of another community. It is this ignorance which is the source of religious prejudice and which is leaving believers exposed to and vulnerable to various influences. Such ignorance can best be overcome if, from the grassroots to the leadership level, religious communities are encouraged to interact with one another. A number of questions arise in this context that we need to ask ourselves and focus on in the years ahead. How can the conditions be established through which the diverse religious and belief communities can concentrate on what unites them rather than what divides them? How do we not settle with merely living side by side each other, but encourage different communities to wholeheartedly work together to uphold this right for everyone. We therefore encourage the OSCE to reflect on how to foster such religious and non-religious collaboration and on how to put in place processes that allow different communities to create a common vision as to how to uphold FORB for all, and to have joint projects to implement this vision. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next is the Order of St. Andrew, followed by the Netherlands on behalf of the European Union. Thank you.
My name is Rocky Sisson, representing the Order of St. Andrew the Apostle. Once again, the Order reports that the Orthodox Ecumenical Patriarch in Turkey is denied basic religious freedom. The Order is a United States-based organization of Orthodox Christian laymen whose mission is to defend the Ecumenical Patriarchate and to preserve its important role in the spiritual life of Orthodox Christians, as well as its prophetic and pastoral voice for all people of the world. The Ecumenical Patriarchate was founded by the Apostle Andrew in 37 AD and has served as a vital religious center for Orthodox Christians ever since. The Ecumenical Patriarchate stands for religious freedom worldwide. In January 2019, he granted autocephaly or independence to the Orthodox Church in Ukraine, healing a long-standing split in the church. Yet the Ecumenical Patriarchate in Turkey for many years has faced a hostile environment which at times threatened its very existence. This is why in 2019, Turkey continues to be on the watch list of the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom, as it has been since 2013. According to the 2019 report, the state of religious freedom in Turkey remained deeply troubling. The Order of St. Andrew has identified and continues to focus on core concerns or issues in its defense of the Ecumenical Patriarch. The continued closure of the School of Theology, of the Halki School of Theology. The reopening of this school is a critical step to the restoration of full religious freedom for the Ecumenical Patriarch. Halki was founded in 1844 and served the Orthodox Christian community until 1971. Then it was closed due to a law banning private institutions of higher education. Sam Brownback, the U.S. Ambassador at Large for International Religious Freedom, has recently said, "The government of Turkey continues to keep the Halki Seminary closed. We call on them to let it be reopened." Denial of legal personality. The Ecumenical Patriarchate has no legal identity or personality in Turkey. The Turkish government denies legal standing to the Ecumenical Patriarch, the Armenian Patriarchate, the Jewish Rabbi's Office, and other religious institutions. The Order therefore respectively submits, in order to comply with the tenets of the OSCE to which the Turkish government is committed, the Turkish government without further delay must undertake the following. It must grant legal standing to the Ecumenical Patriarchate. The Archants have reported on these issues every year. There has been, unfortunately, no change in the status of the Ecumenical Patriarch in Turkey. It is our fervent prayer, however, that next year we can report that these issues have been resolved and that the Ecumenical Patriarchate is operating in an environment of religious freedom, finally free from persecution and discrimination. Thank you.
Thank you. We will now hear from the Netherlands on behalf of the EU, followed by Human Rights Without Frontiers.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I have the honor to speak on behalf of the European Union. North Macedonia, Montenegro, Serbia, Albania, Bosnia-Herzegovina, Iceland, Liechtenstein, and Georgia align themselves with this statement. The EU attaches the greatest importance to the promotion and protection of freedom of thought, conscience, religion, or belief as a fundamental human right and has made it one of the priorities of its human rights foreign policy. The EU Foreign Affairs Council adopted specific guidelines in June 2013, which contain clearly defined priorities and tools for the promotion of freedom of religion or belief worldwide. With these guidelines, the EU reaffirms its determination to promote freedom of religion or belief as a right to be exercised by everyone, everywhere, based on the principles of equality, non-discrimination, and universality. In doing so, the EU focuses on the right of individuals to believe or not to believe, and alone or in community with others, to freely manifest their beliefs in public or in private, in worship, observance, practice, and teaching, without fear of intimidation, discrimination, violence, or attack. Individuals have also the right to change one's religion or belief, or to renounce it. The EU does not consider the merits of the different religions or belief, or the lack thereof, but ensures that the right to believe or not to believe is upheld. The European Union has a number of recommendations. Due to time constraints, I will limit myself to the following. Our full statement will be distributed. Participating states should fulfill their commitments by facilitating groups, associations, and communities built upon religious or non-religious beliefs to peacefully operate and publicly manifest their beliefs and respecting their autonomy. We underline the importance of establishing fair and clear rules and procedures which do not infringe upon OSCE commitments and international human rights standards as outlined in the OSCE ODIHR guidelines on the legal personality of religious or belief communities. We are concerned about the persistence of cases of violations of freedom of religion or belief in the OSCE area. In closing, we express our full support for the work of the ODIHR and its advisory panel on freedom of religion or belief, which provides legal support to participating states in the implementation of their OSCE commitments. We also encourage cooperation between the EU, the OSCE, the Venice Commission, the Council of Europe, and the UN Special Rapporteur on freedom of religion or belief. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you very much. Now we will hear from Human Rights Without Frontiers, to be followed by Poland.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. In our database of religious prisoners covering 20 countries around the world, the Russian Federation occupies a special place with 76 prisoners of conscience whose only crime was the peaceful exercise of their religion. Russia is the only country on the European continent where peaceful believers are treated as criminals because they read their holy scriptures and religious books in private, because they meet for praying and worshipping at home, because they teach their children in their faith, because they share their beliefs with others. 62 Jehovah's Witnesses, 2 Mormons, 5 Sayyid Nursi followers, 1 Tabligh Jamaat Muslim, 1 Sunni in Crimea, and 5 Scientologists were in prison in the first 8 months of this year, 76 in all. A few of them were released and put under house arrest, but the criminal charges are maintained. Dennis Christensen, a Danish citizen living in Russia, was sentenced to 6 years in a labor camp for his alleged role in leading the local Jehovah's Witness branch in Oriol, which he denied. His sentence was upheld by an appeal court 3 months later. He has become the first Jehovah's Witness in post-Soviet Russia to be jailed for exercising their right to freedom of religion and belief. As of August 19, 248 Jehovah's Witnesses ranging in age from 20 to 85 years were facing criminal charges. 38 were in detention, 28 under house arrest, and 88 were subjected to other forms of restrictions. Denials by the government of Russia in response to concerns raised by the UN Human Rights Committee, the European Court of Human Rights, and the European Union to the effect that there is no threat to freedom of religion posed by the Supreme Court ruling banning Jehovah's Witnesses in 2017 lack credibility. Jehovah's Witnesses in Russia are being massively arrested, detained, and prosecuted because of their beliefs. We demand that the Russian Federation put an end to the persecution of Jehovah's Witnesses, release from custody all believers of all faiths charged with extremism under Article 282.2 of the Criminal Code, overturn the Supreme Court ruling banning the 395 Jehovah's Witnesses congregations, and we
Just want to remind you that you're out of time, so I'll
Thank
give you
you.
another 10 seconds, please, to wrap up.
And we urge the OSCE participating states to raise these points in their bilateral relations with Russia. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We will now hear from Poland, followed by Public Fund Terra Libera. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator, and thanks to Mr. Shahid for his presentation and remarks. Poland aligns itself with the statement delivered by the European Union. At the same time, we wish to offer additional remarks. Poland expresses deep concern about the rise of religious intolerance. According to different reports, it is estimated that 1/3 of the world's population suffer from religious persecution in some form. We also strongly condemn all acts of violence and discrimination based on religion or belief. These concerns stood behind the initiative of Poland to establish International Day on commemorating the victims of acts of violence based on religion or belief, pronounced by the United Nations on 22nd August. Mr. Moderator, promotion of religious freedom as well as protection of religious minorities, both in bilateral relations and at international fora, remain at top of Poland's foreign policy. Our diplomatic missions abroad monitor the situation on the ground. We actively contribute during the negotiations of documents regarding these issues. We organize meetings and discussions on this topic. It is also one of important thematic issues during our non-permanent membership in the UN Security Council. We would like to recommend to the OSCE participating states to combat intolerance, discrimination, and hate crimes, especially related to a context of religion or belief, hold accountable all those responsible for acts of violence based on religion or belief, raise the issue of prosecution, discrimination, and violence based on religion or belief at international fora and bilateral political dialogues, contribute to foster respect of tolerance and religious and cultural diversity, both internally and across OSCE area, including through education and awareness raising. We also encourage OSCE and its institutions to continue developing projects that aim to promote tolerance and non-discrimination, involved in marking yearly observation of the International Day on commemorating the victims of acts of violence based on religion or belief. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next is Public Fund Terra Libera, and then we will hear from the Association of Religious Organizations of Kazakhstan, AROK. Thank you.
Our fund, Terra Libera, was created by former members of the Jehovah's Witnesses organization. I was part of that organization for over 20 years. The liberalization of religious relations in Kazakhstan has made citizens more vulnerable to illegal persecutions of certain religious organizations. Taking the advantage of the state policy not to interfere into internal affairs, the Jehovah's Witnesses organization infringes on the basic rights of their members. I will tell you what I'm talking about. What about a document called about violence against children and sexual abuse that instructs members to cover up pedophilia among its members? I can tell you about this heinous instruction. I know facts when mothers were forced to keep silent about the rape of children by the members of this organization. In Europe and America, there are cases open against such people, but in Kazakhstan, we cannot attain justice because the authorities are loyal to that religion. The blatant violation of the rights to protect the privacy of people's lives are also being trampled upon. These rights are based on the Constitution, but there are no effective guarantees to ensure these rights. The Jehovah's Witnesses are forced to drop the national traditions or participate in public life. They force their members to cut ties with their families. The families are being destroyed in the name of fanaticism. There are very major scandals, court cases involving divorce based on this, where children are left without families. Our hearts go out to Irina Shidenko, who was abandoned by her husband, who at first instance seemed to be a decent Jehovah's Witness followers, but now she's left with 2 small children on her hands. Isn't this a violation of human rights? And this is why there is a rise of public intolerance to certain religious minorities. And it is the government which is to blame for this because they're excessively loyal to them. We call on the OSCE to develop recommendations for participating states with regard to non-selective approaches to human rights, independent of the status of those who are to blame, for the government of Kazakhstan to make sure you have an open, objective investigation into human rights violations by Jehovah's Witnesses, to establish measures for social protection for those who have been victims of religious minorities. We invite everyone today to take part in a conference on this topic at 6:15 p.m. in Hall 3.
Sadly, you're out of time, but please submit any further recommendations or the recommendations you have to the Documents Distribution Center, and we will process those and share those. Thank you. We'll hear now from the Association of Religious Organizations of Kazakhstan, to be followed by the Russian Union of Christians of Evangelical Faith. Thank you.
Благодарю вас.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Kishan. Speaking here today, I've once again convinced myself that we need to remember that we live in an imperfect world. There's no single perfect country where everything is rosy, and Central Asian countries are no exception. In light of what was said by the previous speaker, we can clearly see that many criticize, on the one hand, governments for being too tolerant, for not intervening. Others, on the other hand, criticize the government because they supposedly meddle too much in religious affairs, try to regulate their activities on the pretext of combating extremism and extremism. Now, of course, there is a threat when governments combat extremism and terrorism. Nonetheless, we should remember that the freedom of expression is one of the foundations of peace and stability. We must take into account that very complex processes are underway in various Central Asian countries. Countries which have a Soviet past and a post-Soviet past. So, turning our attention to this post-Soviet past, we can also cast our glance further back, 10, 20, 30 years. And with the benefit of hindsight, we can look to the future with optimism and hope. We want to underscore the fact that the development of the relationship between the state and religious groups play a key role in ensuring religious freedoms can be exercised. I want to express our gratitude for the events we have scheduled, working hand in hand with the Ministry of Information and Public Development of the Republic of Kazakhstan. We're going to have local and international experts invited to that event. This has really opened up the way for us to strengthen the freedom of expression in my country. Turning now to the recommendations. I believe that we also need to see the OSCE's support to the process of the dialogue between religious groups and the state. This will help us to foster the freedom of expression, of religion. Thank you very much.
We will now hear from the Russian Union of Christians of Evangelical Faith, and they will be followed by the Center for Human Rights Studies, Akjavik. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Dmitry Shatrov. I'm a pastor of the Pentecostal Church in St. Petersburg. For 4 generations now, in my family, people have served several terms in prison, 20 to 30 years each. Back when I was in kindergarten, my tongue was pricked with needles because I spoke about my faith, and I was vaccinated against the fear of speaking out in defense of my religion. Then, when I went to school, to university, I was humiliated, I was intimidated. I experienced all of that, and praise be to God, I'm here free, and I live in St. Petersburg, probably the most beautiful city on earth. There were attempts also to seize church lands, also the TV channel, which I in part owned. In fact, 15 years we broadcast religious programs on the secular TV channels for up to 2 hours a day. Then a senior partner decided to sell that TV channel, but even after the sale went through, I was still the general manager of TVC St. Petersburg, that TV channel, and continued broadcasting Christian programs. Of course, it's very difficult to talk about religious freedoms in the Russian Federation being violated because the church now has facilities on Nevsky Prospect in the center of the city where we hold services for thousands of believers. It must be said that Nicholas II built that facility so that it could serve religious purposes, and then it was a movie theater. In Europe, by contrast, many temples are becoming bars and entertainment centers, although the churches would gladly take over them. In the Russian Federation, currently, we do see some religious persecution. And of course, there was a lot of that in the Soviet Union, although where, in fact, they elevated the battle against God to the level of government policies. What is worrying is that in 2016, a law about the freedom of conscience and religious organizations, the so-called Yarovo law, was passed. And many experts from religious organizations have noted that this law is at odds with the Russian Constitution and other legislation. When the Russian president signed that law, he said that with time we might need to amend it if necessary. 3 times have gone by, and we believe there's enough goodwill in Russia to look at that law again and bring it into line with the Constitution and international laws. By the start of the 21st century, thanks to the OSCE,
Now we will hear from the Center of Human Rights Studies, Akjavik, followed by the Russian Federation. Is the representative of the Center for Human Rights Studies, Akjavik, in the room? If not, he or she will fall to the bottom of the speaker list. We will now hear from the Russian Federation, and then followed by the Church of Almighty God. Thank you.
Спасибо.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will start with the recommendations. First of all, we would like to recall the need to implement the Basel Ministerial Decision of 2014 with regard to the elaboration of specific ministerial declarations with regard to discrimination and intolerance against Muslims and Christians. And secondly, an issue more of a practical nature, since we are discussing the freedom of religion right now. It doesn't seem that we have any rooms for prayer here, and perhaps this is something we could plan for in the future. Now, on the substance, in today's world, the secularization is at times advancing at breakneck speed. In attempts to emancipate human consciousness in the postmodern era, there are blatant violations of the rights of those who espouse traditional values. First and foremost, we are talking about believers, their right to freely practice any religion of their choosing, and to lead a way of life based on religious teachings. Unfortunately, not in all countries in the OSCE area do the rights of believers are respected, and many countries close their eyes on a regular basis with regard to the traditional religions, Jews, Christians, or Muslims in their countries or very close to their borders. Christians, their holy sites and believers are openly harassed. How does this square with the West's constant preachings about tolerance and the freedom of religion? In this context, it would be unfair not to mention the situation with regard to religious freedom in Ukraine, where we continue to see the persecution and attacks against the canonical Orthodox Church. Vandalism, taking over churches, attacks against priests in Ukraine are still quite specific and very targeted at times. Not so long ago, under the pressure of political elite with some other countries involved, a new church was created, the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. We see that American diplomats often visit these institutions. These diplomats and their insistence at the highest level are appealing to recognize this new church. In the modern world, it's impossible to have separate islands of security, and all of these issues, including religious issues, can only be solved if we work together.
But please submit your recommendations to the documents distribution desk. Now the Church of Almighty God, to be followed by the representation of the Orthodox Church of Ukraine to the European institutions. Thank you.
Thank you, moderator. Ladies and gentlemen, I feel honored to take the floor today on behalf of the Church of Almighty God, CAG, asylum seekers in Germany. Since the Chinese Communist Party took power, its persecution of Christianity has never stopped and even peaked in recent years, especially targeting the Church of Almighty God. In order to eliminate the CAG, the CCP has launched multiple special operations. More than 400,000 CAG members have been arrested in China from 2011 to date. Some have to flee abroad to seek asylum. So far, there are 310 CAG asylum seekers in Germany. 80% of their asylum applications were rejected, and 14 received departure orders. There are two main reasons for rejection. One, BAMF did not give enough time for CAG applicants to give full statements of their persecution experience. When they were finally able to testify their full experience before the appellate courts, the latter found larger inconsistencies between their appeal and their BAMF statements and rejected their applications. Two, since the applicants were able to safely pass Chinese customs with valid documents, they won't run any risks if returning to China. Although the applicants referred to the scholarly literature explaining how passports can be obtained in China even by ex-convicts and members of persecuted groups. Also due to the widespread corruption there. The courts dismissed their appeals. However, once the CAG Christians are repatriated, they will regularly face imprisonment, torture, and even death. In August 2018, a CAG Christian who was deported from Germany to China was transferred to Chinese police, and her whereabouts are still unknown. This June, another CAG Christian was escorted to the airport for repatriation, and this happened even before she received a formal rejection letter from the court. In a similar case, the German government indefinitely suspended the repatriation of Uyghurs and re-examined their cases after deported Uyghur asylum applicant who went missing in China. So here, we urge German government to pay attention to CAG Christians who have suffered the same severe persecution as Uyghurs have, and abide by the non-refoulement principle and grant the CAG Christians political asylum. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I should just say that we are now a fifth of the way through the speaker list, and it's been very encouraging to see the number of recommendations coming through. We will encourage that to continue, and also to encourage speakers to present the recommendations at the outset of their submissions. So, on to the representation of the Orthodox Church of Ukraine to the European institutions, to be followed by the Crimean Human Rights Group. Thank you.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. It is sad to say that in the past, religious and secular representatives of the Russian side, including representatives of the Moscow Patriarchate from Ukraine, use the opportunities of international meetings to spread propaganda directed against the independent Orthodox Church of Ukraine. First of all, this concerns the ongoing accusation of allegedly taking place the seizure of churches of the Moscow Patriarchate in Ukraine. Religious communities in our country have the status of a legal entity and, in accordance with the general right to the freedom of religion, have the right at their general meeting to decide change their subordination. The Moscow Patriarchate is trying by all available methods to prevent communities from realizing such a right. For this, disinformation, pressure, intimidation of activists, pressure on authorities, and the like are used. The Orthodox Church of Ukraine has consistently advocated for the observance of the right to freedom of religion, including the right of a religious community to freely determine the religious center to which it wishes to submit. We actively cooperate with representatives of the OSCE and other international organizations in their matters. Another important topic that requires an immediate response from the international community is the persecution of the Ukrainian Orthodox community led by Archbishop Clement by the Russian occupying authorities occurring in the Autonomous Republic of Crimea. Hiding behind the decision of the Russian courts, authorities in occupied Crimea have taken away the church from the religious community of Saints Volodymyr and Olga in Simferopol. Representatives of the community turned to the UN Human Rights Committee, which took up the issue and demanded that the Russian side stop the eviction of the community from the church, but this requirement has also been ignored. We ask the international community to take all possible steps so that Russia adheres to its obligations and does not violate the right to freedom of religion. We recommend OSCE, ODIHR, and a special monitoring mission in Ukraine start monitoring the violations of the freedom of religion and belief in Crimea in Russian-occupied regions of Ukraine, especially regarding the execution of the UN Human Rights Committee decision. We also recommend to the Russian Federation fulfill its obligations and end the religious persecution in the occupied territories. Thank you for attention.
Thank you. Now the Crimean Human Rights Group, to be followed by the Center for Civil Liberties.
Today we need to talk about the fact that in Crimea, Muslims are being persecuted. They are being persecuted for being terrorists, but only because they're trying to be free. Only 36 people have been locked up. In Crimea, since occupation, 66 people have been detained. From November of 2018, in Crimea, a criminal proceeding started against the Jehovah's Witnesses. At the time, there were 3 mass searches of members of that organization. 4 were accused of extremism by Russia. They continue to take measures to stop missionaries. People are being persecuted for talking about religious topics, religious rights, to go to churches, or the distribution of religious literature. They say that this is illegal missionary activities. There are 65 such cases. Another example of this is a very recent case. In the summer of 2019, in Sevastopol, a group of Krishna followers started to sing songs. The Ministry of Internal Affairs received a complaint against them, and the Krishna followers were fined 5,000 rubles for missionary activities. This is something that the Krishna followers published on their own website, and it was clear that they were far in the woods. They were not spreading missionary information to anyone. The Crimean media loyal to the Russian Federation often talk about people who are parts of a sect, a terrorist, or agents of the West. Based on this information, the position of the Moscow Orthodox Church's position, their representatives are very free to hold mass events in Crimea. Also, they are protected by the police. This is targeted discrimination where the Moscow Church has the leading position while everybody else is being harassed. In conclusion, we'd like to say year to year, the Russian Federation should stop the persecution of religious organizations in Crimea on the occupied territories. This is under the obligations of the freedom of religion, where Russia must fulfill its obligations as an occupying power and under international law.
Now we will hear from the Center for Civil Liberties, to be followed by the United States of America.
Добрый день, я из Крыма.
Good morning. I'm from Crimea. I'm a lawyer. I just wanted to say that the negative practice of persecuting dissenters in Crimea started after 2014. The systemic harassment is something that the Ukrainian Orthodox Church believers are victim to, Jehovah's Witnesses, but mostly it is the Muslims who suffer. In all of the mosques, there are searches. The mosques have to install surveillance cameras. Before the holy month of Ramadan, 11 mosques in Crimea had their electricity cut off. The main reason, supposedly, was because they had back payments due for electricity. In the mosque in Volochinsk, this was $0.33 of a dollar. Then the courts used this illegal decision, closed down one of the mosques in Alushta. This mosque was opened in 1994 by the decision of the Council of Ministers of the Independent Republic of Crimea, which the mosque was provided free of charge. For many years, this mosque was open, but now the Muslims in the region no longer have access to it. But the persecution continued. The head of the religious community is now being accused of terrorism, and he is also in jail. The criminal persecution of the chairman of that institution is not a unique case. At the same time, 2 other members of that religious community are being criminally persecuted. 2 people who were charged with terrorism by the Russian Federation, you can add their names to 63 Crimean Tatars as well. You may ask, which terrorist acts did they commit? None at all. During the searches of their homes, they found nothing. There were no guns, there were no explosives. The most they could find was religious literature. And sometimes they would just even plant some literature there. And sometimes people are just harassed for dissent.
Come to the end of your time. If you have any recommendations, do please submit them to the documents distribution desk. Next, United States of America, to be followed by the public organization Human Rights Movement of Crimea. Thank you.
Thank you. The United States recently highlighted the importance of religious freedom this past July at the Ministerial to Advance Religious Freedom, which was hosted by U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. In many countries, including in the OSCE region, individuals and members of religious communities are denied the right to freely profess and practice their religion or belief. Together with like-minded partners, the United States is launching an international religious freedom alliance to promote and defend this basic right. We welcome the steps Uzbekistan has taken to promote freedom of religion or belief, including the registration of 4 churches and the release of some prisoners. However, about 1,000 individuals remain in detention for reasons of religion or belief. We urge the Uzbek authorities to register religious congregations with pending applications and seek ODIHR's review of their draft religion law. Turkmenistan surveils, detains, and imprisons people for alleged violations of the country's religion laws. Authorities also imprison conscientious objectors, including 10 Jehovah's Witnesses, at this current time. Tajikistan sets strict parameters on the practice of Islam, limiting the ability of minority religious organizations to register and restricting women and youth participation in religious activities. Authorities have carried out raids and interrogations against members of religious groups. The Russian Federation's prosecution of members of religious minorities under anti-extremism and counterterrorism laws is intensifying. Following the Supreme Court's 2017 ruling classifying Jehovah's Witnesses as an extremist organization, authorities have opened approximately 200 criminal extremism investigations against individuals and imprisoned more than 50 Jehovah's Witnesses. In February, authorities in Surgut tortured at least 7 Jehovah's Witnesses with beatings, suffocation, and electric shocks during an interrogation. The NGO Memorial reported 244 cases of persons imprisoned for their religious belief in Russia as of August 2019, more than triple the number from 2017. Most of those imprisoned are Muslims. Authorities in Russia-occupied Crimea and Russian-controlled areas of eastern Ukraine are repressing members of minority religious congregations there. We urge Turkey to confer formal recognition on Alevi places of worship and to fulfill past commitments to reopen the Halki Seminar, closed now for nearly 50 years. And several participating states' bans on religious animal slaughter are impinging on Jews and Muslims' ability to observe kosher and halal dietary practices. We encourage those states to revise these laws in consultation with religious communities and ODIHR. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now hear from the public organization Human Rights Movement of Crimea and then Belgium. Thank you.
The situation which today is glaring in Crimea, where the Russian Federation has claimed that any religious organization whose position does not correspond to the official position of the government, has in fact for dozens of years been in place in Russia and Central Asia. But it is not limited to only these countries. These countries have gone further and started to abuse Interpol in order to persecute their citizens in third countries. The national offices of Interpol exchange unilateral recommendation requests claiming that these citizens are on the Interpol red list. This is while Article 3 of the Interpol Charter clearly bans the use of this instrument based on political, religious, or racial motivations. In October 27, the Central Bureau of Interpol sent a warning to all member states that they should ignore all of the diffusional, unilateral Russian Federation requests because this is done for political reasons. This is linked to Valia Adalov, a Russian citizen, when the prosecution of Ukraine started criminal proceedings based on this unilateral request of Russia through Interpol. He's being accused of being an international coup d'etat, claiming that he has committed a terrorist act, where there are cases now prepared against Crimean Tatars. We contacted Interpol and saying that Interpol is trying to find Valiev based on illicit reasons. And it was been clear that the use of the abuse of this international instrument is a violation that we must close our eyes to. And this is not just one case. There are 33 cases of citizens of Russia and Central Asia involved in such abuses. We would like the international community to pay attention to this problem, because using the guise of combating terrorism and extremism, using Interpol, Russia and Central Asian countries are trying to deal with the activist organizations that they would like to get rid of. This is something which is illegal, and it helps these countries to pursue their citizens for their religious views. We are not talking about organizations that are involved in violence or terrorism, though. Thank you.
Much. Belgium, to be followed by the Moscow Patriarchate, please. Thank you.
Belgium would like to fully align itself with the statement read out by the EU and the proposed recommendations. I will now add a couple of points in my national capacity. Belgium is deeply committed to the defense of fundamental values and the rule of law, as well as to freedoms which can be exercised within a legal framework. These freedoms include the freedom of religion, of conscience, citizenship, and security. These values are enshrined in our legislation, as well as in documents adopted by international organizations, which Belgium is party to or a member of, including the OSCE. Confronted with growing challenges in this sphere and the need for all of us to get along, in 2017, a structural dialogue was set up by the government involving the federal authorities and representatives of recognized religious organizations, as well as a secular organization. The two first meetings we held mounted a defense, defending our democratic values. This allowed us to express our unswerving determination to combat terrorism, radicalism, and hate speech, as well as our willingness to promote citizenship, the rule of law, and to all just get along. The objective of these meetings is, well, for the government, it's to lend an ear to the representatives of the recognized religious bodies and the secular organization, as well as to discuss fundamental values and the constitutional principle of the independence of religions and philosophical views from civilian authorities. We also discussed topical issues and legislative changes. In March 2019, a joint declaration was signed by the Prime Minister and the Minister of Justice, as well as representatives of recognized religious bodies and this secular organization. This declaration contains basic rules underpinning good governance. It commits participants to eschew funding coming from overseas, which could scupper their independence. The declaration also calls on the signatories to ensure the transparency of their financing. Furthermore, the government has kickstarted a number of initiatives so as to facilitate the integration of Islamic communities, represented by the Executive of Muslims in Belgium. This body is responsible for Islamic teaching, the training of imams, and the recognition that is granted to new Islamic communities, inter alia. The Ministry of Justice has broadened the theological services available to women in the Muslim community by, at the request of the executive, setting up new positions, specifically that of female theologian and female preacher, which...
Time. We'll hear now from the Moscow Patriarchate, followed by the United Kingdom. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Russian Orthodox Church and the Russian Association of Defenders of Religious Freedom on numerous occasions have expressed their concern with the numerous facts of the violation of the rights of believers of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church in Ukraine. The exacerbation of the religious situation in Ukraine from 2018 to 2019 was due to pursue pre-election campaign goals. Now, since Poroshenko has left, we no longer have this aggressive campaign against the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. This negative rhetoric has seriously waned, and we no longer have seizures of churches and vandalism. The new authorities in Ukraine are really trying not to interfere with religious life. But for this fragile interfaith balance to be reinstated, there's a great job ahead of us. The Volynsk, Rovensk, Vinnytsk, Chernivtska regions are still under the influence of officials named by the former regime. There is still a lot of violence against churches. There is discrimination and vague language of new religious laws, which now need to be amended. Also, we need to have an objective investigation of the former violations and make sure that court decisions are enacted that were sabotaged by former leadership. Mr. Yurash, present here today, the Director of the Department of Religion and Ethnicity from the Ministry of Internal Affairs of Ukraine, has told us many times that the rights of religious people are respected. But now he is being criminally charged by putting pressure on the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, and this is something good. We wish every success to Vladimir Zelensky, the new president, to reestablish the rights of those who have been victims of religious persecution and violence. We hope that the totalitarian regime of Poroshenko's heritage will be erased and that we can help the country in doing so. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now the United Kingdom, to be followed by Set My People Free.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator, and thank you to the introducer for his thoughtful remarks. The UK fully aligns with the statement delivered by the Netherlands on behalf of the EU, but I'd like to add some comments in my national capacity. Promoting and defending human rights, including a freedom of thought, conscience, religion or belief, is a priority for the United Kingdom. Over the past year, we have stepped up our work, focusing not only on combating intolerance, but also, crucially, on promoting respect and understanding between communities. On the 12th of September this year, Mr. Reman Chisti, MP, succeeded Lord Ahmed of Wimbledon as the Prime Minister's Special Envoy for Freedom of Religion or Belief. The UK has spoken up for the rights of religious minorities across the world, including over 1 million Uyghurs detained in so-called re-education camps in China, Jehovah's Witnesses in Russia, and the Baha'i in Iran and Yemen. We have also worked multilaterally with our partners and friends to defend freedom of religion or belief. This includes co-sponsoring the Polish-led UN resolution creating a new international day to commemorate the victims of acts of violence based on religion or belief, as well as co-sponsoring an informal UN Security Council meeting in New York on advancing the safety and security of persons belonging to religious minorities in armed conflict. Working closely with faith and belief leaders has remained a key part of our work. The UK also works very closely with individuals and leaders of no religion or belief, such as humanists and atheists, whose safety is under threat in many parts of the world. Special Envoy Reman Chisti will continue this work to promote religious freedom and champion the cause of those being persecuted for their faith or belief. In December last year, the former Foreign Secretary commissioned an independent review on support to persecuted Christians globally. The final report of the independent review presented a series of recommendations on measures the UK can take to support persecuted Christians overseas. The UK government accepted all of the recommendations and work has begun to implement them. We hope that the review will inspire other governments, including those with strong track records on human rights, to look at what else they can do to help some of the most vulnerable people around the world. Our commitment to freedom of thought, conscience, religion or belief, including the right to adopt, change or leave your religion, is unwavering, and we look forward to continuing our work to defend this human right in line with our OSCE commitments. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We will now hear from Set My People Free and then the Kazakhstan International Bureau for Human Rights and the Rule of Law. Thank you.
I have encouraging news for everyone because in July this year, 27 countries, including part of these 27, 20 from the Organization of Security and Cooperation here, signed this document. This was the Ministerial Advanced Religious Freedom Statement on Blasphemy and Apostasy Law. I believe apostasy and blasphemy laws are the greatest enemies of religious freedom because it strips the individual from freedom of thought, conscience, and belief, freedom to change belief, freedom to believe or not to believe, freedom to practice what you believe or your own ideology or religion. So it was very important statement, and I want to thank the people who have signed it and actually commend them for signing it. We need really a big alliance to stop this apostasy and blasphemy law because it is impacting many people and stripping them from their freedom. And so we would like more countries to sign this. Apostasy and blasphemy laws are more dangerous than slave trade. And we need to, and also worse than apartheid. And we need to work together to see these laws taken away. There is 1.3 billion people who have no freedom to leave Islam. In 13 countries, it is capital punishment if you leave Islam. In other 12 countries, it is a crime. You don't have the right even to exist as an ex-Muslim, legally. So I plead with you that we work together to see apostasy and blasphemy laws repealed because it stands against the basic human right of freedom of thought and conscience and belief and also expression. And we need to see something happening to see these laws taken away. And we need all your help. So please sign this document.
Thank you very much. And if you have any specific recommendations, do submit those. So now we'll hear from the Kazakhstan International Bureau for Human Rights and the Rule of Law, to be followed by the representation of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church to the European International Organization, it says here. I imagine that's European institutions.
Thank you very much. The freedom of opinion and freedom of association are the main conditions for cooperation and security, but it's very dangerous when religion is turned into an instrument of settling scores with dissenters. We know that today we need to put an end to this, and there's a practice in Kazakhstan to initiate criminal cases against people who are brave enough to speak their minds and whose opinion is different from the official version of what is happening in the country. It's very easy to label these people as extremists and terrorists. Currently, the authorities of Kazakhstan are trying to use dissent to put down actual dissent. Now, people whose opinions are different from official policies are then victims of persecution and criminal cases and investigation. In Kazakhstan, we have a new religion. We are living in a situation where this religion for 30 years has been imposed on us. It's called Yelbasim. Yelbasism is a religion, basically, which prays to the person of President Nazarbayev. In 2002, the law has been taken to continue the policies of President Nazarbayev. This law establishes the unlimited mandate of the president.
I draw your attention that it is out of the topic. Please invite the speaker to speak to the topic.
Thank you for raising that point of order.
Yep.
I remind all speakers to speak to the topic at hand. And if you have any specific recommendations, we would be grateful for those now, please. Thank you.
Specific recommendations. The broad mandate of the OSCE under international obligations gives the OD of the OSCE to assess the current law in Kazakhstan passed in 2001 on the president.
Point of order from Kazakhstan, sorry.
It's again against the topic.
You've noted that. Please continue.
May I continue? May I continue? Yes, the recommendation to initiate an assessment of this law together with the Venice Commission and with European Commission with regard to how this law squares with the obligations under the human dimension. This gives additional authorities and rights to the previous president of Kazakhstan, who still rules over the freedoms and democratic changes in Kazakhstan. This is what stands in the way of the development of our country.
Please submit that recommendation to the Documents Distribution Center. Yes, there's another point of order. Kazakhstan again, please.
I have to call you to follow to the procedure of the speakers. You gave the floor 3 times, and 3 times you're speaking out of the content.
Thank you. There's a point of order from Canada.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Again, points of order are on rules of procedure, not on the substance of the discussion. So it is in your capability to ask the speaker to return to the topic at hand, but participating states cannot intervene to ask speakers to change what they're talking about. Thank you.
Thank you for those points of order. And we do ask, of course, all speakers to speak to the topic, to put forward recommendations on the topic. And if there are any concerns around the substance, of course, states have the right of reply, and Kazakhstan and other states are free to exercise that towards the end of the session. So thank you very much for your points of order. I will now proceed to hear from the representation of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church to the European International Organization, to be followed by FECRI, the European Federation of Centers of Research and Information on Cults and Sects. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Dear participants of the meeting, I have the feeling that OSCE representatives and participants in this meeting got confused about how many Orthodox churches exist in Ukraine. I'll sort it out. In Ukraine, there is only one legitimate Ukrainian Orthodox Church, which is recognized by all the other Orthodox churches in the world. It is led by Metropolitan Onufry, and today I, Bishop Victor, represent this church here. The other, unrecognized by the fullness of Orthodoxy, will be mentioned further on. Despite the fact that the Ukrainian Orthodox Church is the largest denomination of the country, we don't demand any privileges but insist that all faiths should have equal rights and be equal before the law. Our church has never claimed anyone else's property, which cannot be said about the recently created structure called Orthodox Church of Ukraine. Let me remind you that the Ukrainian Orthodox Church has been openly persecuted by state authorities for almost 5 years. Since the beginning of 2019, members of the so-called Orthodox Church of Ukraine seized 91 of our temples by force. Our believers are beaten up by the radicals and the police. The parliament of the last convocation passed the law depriving the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of its canonical name. Criminal cases are opened against our priests for defending their faith and their parishioners. I'd like to focus your attention on the fact that the project of granting the Tomos of autocephaly to breakaway groups by Constantinople Patriarch Bartholomew has failed. This decision is de facto rejected by the Ukrainian people. Its implications for Ukraine being religious antagonism instead of reconciliation. This is confirmed by the split with the Orthodox Church of Ukraine itself and the refusal of part of the structure from the autocephaly granted by Patriarch Bartholomew. Despite notable difficulties in the religious life of the country caused by the previous Poroshenko-led government, there is a glimmer of hope for our church since new president of Ukraine, Mr. Zelensky, openly declared that the government should not interfere in church affairs and he will defend the independence of the church. Therefore, we believe that the new Ukrainian power will repair the mistakes of the predecessors and stop the violation of our believers' rights. We also request the international community to fully support Ukraine in this respect. If someone may be interested in this short presentation, please turn to the OSCE documentary base where you will find the full text of my statement and our recommendations for establishing interfaith peace in Ukraine. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Now we'll hear from FECRI, followed by NGO sociologist. Thank you.
Cults and closed political regimes operate on the same principle, that of totalitarianism in which all powers are united in the same hand, legislative, executive, and judicial power, leaving no room for any counterpower. This system on which cultist groups are based is far removed from the fundamental values of our democracies for which our citizens have fought. Our organization, FECRIS, has been committed for more than 20 years to defend individuals at risk from these misleading systems, and comes to this forum every year to remind you that its fight is based on the European Convention on Human Rights, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the International Convention on the Rights of the Child. However, it is regularly attacked on your own grounds. We come here to deplore and warn you of this misleading. These cultist groups used to invoke freedom of religion as if they were similar to other minority spiritual groups, abused and violated in their legitimate rights. Sometimes they are wolves in sheep's clothing, carrying beliefs that engender the founding pillars of democracy, spreading discrimination, closure, fear of others, lies, and hatred, and even sometimes believing they have the power of life or death on themselves, on their followers. If their claims prevail, our democracy is in danger.
Thank you. Now hear from NGO sociologist, followed by the Orthodox Metropolitanate of Montenegro and the Littoral Serbian Orthodox Church. Thank you.
Sehr geehrte Herr Vorsitzender, Tadschikistan ist ein Land mit muslimischer religiöser Identität.
Dear participants, Tajikistan is a country where most of the inhabitants are Muslims. And this Muslim identity is part of our national identity. However, in modern-day Tajikistan, it is secular legislation that governs the relationships between citizens in society. I, much like most of my countrymen, don't want to live in a state underpinned by religious principles. I want to live in a country governed by the Constitution. And in fact, the Constitution states very clearly that Tajikistan is a democratic, secular, and rule-based state. However, the Islamic Renaissance Party does not agree. This party has been deemed to be a terrorist and extremist organization by the Supreme Court. Since it sprung up, this organization has pursued one goal and one goal only. It wants to establish an Islamic state on the territory of Tajikistan. However, we are a freedom-loving people with a very rich culture. We don't want to live in this kind of religious state which religious radicals want to establish by waging war. To illustrate my point, let me tell you the following. On the 3rd of November 2011, Mahmoud Ali Hayat, the deputy head of the Islamic Renaissance Party, took part in a meeting with a group of German MPs, which took place at the German embassy in Tajikistan. He was asked by a Bundestag member, "What will you do if you accede to power?" And he said, and here I quote, "If we accede to power, we will rip up the constitution and introduce religious law, that is, Sharia law." End of quote. One of the participants of that meeting then gave an interview to Deutsche Welle, that radio station, and he said the following: religious groups and political parties in Tajikistan must respect the constitution. If you take a religious attitude when it comes to moral questions, you should still uphold the constitution. We, as Democrats, do not welcome attempts to impose Sharia law. Now, this meeting is one I took part in my capacity as representative of the Friedrich Ebert Fund, and there are records of this in the Bundestag archives.
Now we'll hear from the Orthodox Metropolitanate of Montenegro and the Littoral Serbian Orthodox Church, followed by centralized religious organization, the Muslim Religious Board of the Republic of Tatarstan. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to address one particular issue on behalf of the Orthodox Metropolitanate of Montenegro and the Littoral and other dioceses of the Serbian Orthodox Church in Montenegro. I just want to emphasize that our church is gathering a huge majority of the population in Montenegro. It is about 70 or even more than 70% of the population and the lawful citizens. So I believe that gives us like a right to feel that this issue and our concerns are legitimate. Namely, we in Montenegro, we are facing adopting a procedure of adopting of a new, at the moment it's a draft law on freedom of religion. And that draft law, the government adopted it without having actually the real open institutional dialogue with the churches and the religious communities. What as we can see now and as we will see, cause the problems. The problems are about the content of that draft law and the possibly future law on religious freedoms and freedoms of religions in Montenegro. Two most alarming issues concerning the content of the coming law on freedom of religion in Montenegro are, first of all, annihilation, termination, in other words, of the previously obtained legal status of the religious communities and the churches. And second of all, I would say the most alarming issues and the one that is threatening to cause possibly religious violence and a hatred in the future is intent of the government to use this draft law to introduce confiscation of the religious properties of the churches and religious organization. In Article 62 of the draft law that is coming in Montenegro on the scene, it says shortly that religious buildings and land shall become state property if they do not possess the right evidences and so on and so on. So that's really problematic, and facing this, we had like an official opinion of the Venice Commission made a couple of months ago. It was the late June of 2019, and the government of Montenegro, what we hope is going to happen, the Prime Minister promised that the opinion and the recommendations from the Venice Commission opinion will be adopted and that the draft law will be fixed, to cite him. So we hope it could be a case and that we would avoid the problems with the confiscation of the property. Thank you.
Thank you. We are almost halfway through the session and almost halfway through the speakers list. So that's pretty good going. Just to remind everyone that we encourage speakers to start with recommendations. We've had a number, thank you for those. And also to bear in mind the questions that are listed in the annotated agenda to guide consultations, to guide discussions, and hopefully to evoke suitable and interesting responses in the form of recommendations. So, we will now proceed to hear from the centralized religious organization, the Muslim Religious Board of the Republic of Tatarstan, to be followed by public organization, Public Advocacy. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I came from the Republic of Tatarstan. It is found in the Russian Federation. In the 1990s, we faced problems in that we practically had no mosques. There had only been 23. Today, we have 1,553. Every 2 weeks, we open a new mosque. We've opened madrasas. We have our own television channel and our own radio station. I wanted to tell you about the relations with the Christian church, with the Jewish community, with other religions. Maybe in the past we had difficult relations, but today, with the head of the Orthodox Church, together with myself, I'm the Mufti, we have very good relations. We had an experiment, an interfaith football game. On the one hand, we had Muslims and Christians, and we wanted to create mixed teams, not to say that the Muslims or the Christians won. We had mixed teams. And then we called our team Duslik. In the Tatar language, it means friendship, and the other team was also called Druzhba, friendship. As a Mufti, I also took part in these games. It was a very good experience, and we replicated that experiment many times, including in Moscow. We all understood that we live in one building, in one house, so everyone has their own apartment. I invite you to our land, to Kazan. You will see that you have a Jewish school. Across the street from it, you have the Catholic cathedral. You will see that we are very diverse. We will be very happy to share our experience with you.
Very much. On to public organization, Public Advocacy, to be followed by Public Political Movement, Vatandor. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. First of all, I would like to thank Ukraine and the newly elected President Vladimir Zelensky for the thaw in the attitude of the state towards the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. Despite the fact that violations of believers continue, we cannot but note that their intensity has significantly decreased, particularly in cases when state agents appear as offenders. This is undoubtedly a positive trend. However, this is not enough to demonstrate to the world that Ukraine actually respects human rights and is ready to really stop persecutions of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. We believe that in order to fulfill international obligations on the protection of rights in its territory, Ukraine needs to cease the criminal prosecution of priest Viktor Zemlyanoy, who is accused of his human rights activities. Those responsible for seizing the Ukrainian Orthodox Church temples and beating the believers in villages Katerynovka, Rozhvash, as well as many other villages, should be held accountable, while the seized temples should be returned to the Ukrainian Orthodox Church believers. The Parliament of Ukraine must immediately repeal the discriminatory law on the renaming of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, which obviously violates the rights to freedom of religion and imposes on believers an identity alien to them. Finally, it is necessary to show in practice an equal treatment of the state of all faiths and register amendments to the statutes of 14 monasteries and dioceses of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. Let me remind you that for more than 2 years, the head structures of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church have not been able to obtain state registration, for which reason legal proceedings have been initiated. It is also important to understand that the decisions of Patriarch Bartholomew to grant autocephaly to a number of churches has led to a conflict between the churches and exacerbated the religious hostility in the country. Now, even ardent supporters of the Thomas, the Church of the Kiev Patriarchate, began to struggle to maintain their independence from the so-called Holy Church of Ukraine or Orthodox Church of Ukraine, subordinate to Constantinople. All these facts are analyzed in detail in the full text of our statement, which is placed in the OCC system. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Now the public political movement Vantandor will speak, to be followed by the Interreligious Council of Russia. Is the representative of the public political movement Vatandor in the room, please? No? If not, they will drop down to the bottom of the speakers list, and we will now hear from the Interreligious Council of Russia, to be followed by the international platform Global Rights of Peaceful People. Thank you very much.
Спасибо.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. Distinguished colleagues, I am a representative of the Interreligious Council of Russia. This organization brings together the heads of the Orthodox, Islamic, Jewish, and Buddhist religious communities in the Russian Federation. In my experience, on many occasions, I have seen foreign religious leaders giving top marks to Russia because believers in Russia feel very comfortable. Foreign religious leaders were baffled to see the good neighborly relations which reign in Russia amongst various believers. This is not just a subjective assessment given by guests to our country. In fact, Russia can be held up as a shining example when it comes to believers' rights and harmonious interreligious relations. These statistics corroborate this. For instance, we have hardly any anti-Semitism or Islamophobia in Russia, and certainly much less than in other parts of the world, especially Europe. In Russia, we have very constructive relations between the state and religious organizations, underpinned by the principle of non-interference in each other's affairs and cooperation in areas of common interest. The Interreligious Council of Russia has organized a number of major forums. In May of this year, together with the Russian Association for Protecting Religious Freedoms, we held a conference on the violations of believers' rights in the Ukraine. Religious leaders did not make politicized statements because they care very deeply about believers who are in a very testing situation. In our statements, we often refer to Ukraine as the brother nation, and we wish Ukraine the very best. It's wonderful that since the new president came to power, we see that the situation has improved and there is ground for optimism. Last week, the Interreligious Council of Russia held a conference dedicated to the topic of the family and the protection of traditional family values. On the whole, in Russia, the overwhelming majority of people espouse traditional moral and spiritual values. This is one of the reasons why believers in modern-day Russia feel that they are free and safe. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you. Now the international platform Global Rights of Peaceful People, and then Kazakhstan. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, distinguished participants, as soon as we start talking about Ukraine here, we go back to February of 2014. The European values and democracy that came to Ukraine by the US and EU destroyed the peace in Ukraine. And the situation with freedom of religion is terrible in Ukraine. Every day we see the situation exacerbating. Over the past 5.5 years, we have seen a major transformation with the traditional Russian Orthodoxy in our country, in the renaming of the Russian Orthodox Church into the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, up to the persecution of priests and followers of the Orthodox Church followers. And people have been also beat up. Under the Poroshenko regime, politicians committed crimes and desecration. The Autocephalous decision and priest Varfolomei created an organization called the Orthodox Church of Ukraine, which is not acknowledged by any Orthodox institution in the world. This is something that was supposed to justify all of the abuse and illicit actions against Orthodox Church in Ukraine. I'm a citizen of Ukraine. I lived in Odessa. In the center of Odessa, we have a cathedral, and we have the Orthodox Russian Church and a synagogue and other religious institutions. Up to 2014, we lived in peace and harmony. Now, the representatives of the so-called Orthodox Church of Ukraine destroyed all of this. There is no peace anymore. Now, they have created an interactive map of seizure of churches. In March of 2019, we have seen 60 community churches that have been seized. Recommendation to call on Ukrainian authorities to implement the international obligation of freedom of religion. Secondly, to return the churches to the Moscow Patriarch Orthodox Church as assets that were seized by the Ukrainians by ultra-far-right people. Thank you.
We will now hear from Kazakhstan and then from the Union of Legal Entities, Union of Pentecostal Churches of Kazakhstan. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Kazakhstan is open to constructive dialogue on interreligious freedom and the rights of all persons. And the fact that we have constant contacts with various NGOs, international partners, and religious organizations attest to this. At the end of last year, in fact, we decided to strike down amendments to a law governing the activities of religious bodies on our territory. Freedom of conscience, freedom of belief are fundamental human rights. Citizens, foreigners, and stateless persons can practice their faith, any faith, without having to undergo registration. However, proselytizing is only permitted once the organization, the faith group in question, undergoes registration. The international norms we apply are transparent and applicable to all. Religious groups do not have to pay taxes, they do not have to pay VAT, and many other taxes. There are other preferences which religious groups enjoy as non-commercial organizations, not-for-profit organizations. What we do dislike is when some people are forced to convert. Foreigners and stateless persons, as well as religious groups, can undergo all sorts of activities, but only after they register. All of the efforts we have undertaken have meant that more and more missionaries are coming to Kazakhstan. In October 2018, we held the 6th Religious Leaders for a Safe World conference. And in fact, 18 sessions took place with representatives of various faith groups. What we also have in Kazakhstan is a council within the Ministry of Information and Civic Development. It's very active in the regions and in the capital. The council is made up of leaders of various religious sects, also representatives of the authorities and other public figures. The council's goal is to come up with the recommendations as to how we can implement state policy in this sphere and improve relations between the state and religious leaders. They meet at least once a quarter. By way of conclusion, I want to underscore yet again that upholding the freedom of conscience of our citizens is a top priority for the Republic of Kazakhstan. It is, in fact, part and parcel of our democratic development. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next to speak, the Union of Legal Entities, Union of Pentecostal Churches of Kazakhstan, followed by Political Movement Group 24. Thank you.
Distinguished participants of our meeting, I greet you on behalf of the Kazakhstan entity Union of Pentecostal Churches. We are the largest movement of Protestants in our country and represent the interest of over 80 evangelical associations, which is about a year and a half old. Thanks God, we have 15,000 brothers and sisters have started to function in our country since independence. We have over 100 different ethnic groups who practice many different religions. The largest is Islam, Orthodox religion, etc. With such a diversity of religion, of course, we sometimes face issues between the believers and the government or amongst the religious groups. Mostly they are individual disputes or because certain officials or church officials don't do the right thing because they do not know the law sufficiently or they are not aware of the religion of the others. The law on the registration of certain churches in Astana, there was a problem registering them, but then the problem was solved. Now, there was a problem when there was a violation of the rights of third parties, and the police interviewed us, and we resolved that problem together with the police. The religious communities have assets and buildings. In certain regions of Kazakhstan, there are hindrances to change the registration of houses into religious buildings, but this is an administrative issue that we're able to resolve. Now, we have a true dialogue at the highest level, which helps us to swiftly and smoothly resolve all disputes and problems without any kind of violence or agitation or through conflict. Unfortunately, some believers and non-believers try to hide their problems and sometimes violations by giving them a religious image.
Your recommendations to the documents distribution center.
Can I tell you my recommendations?
Speaker will be from the Political Movement Group 24, followed by the Regional Center of Human Rights, please.
Guten Tag, meine Damen und Herren.
Good morning. Good afternoon, everyone. I am part of Group 24. Article 26 of the Constitution of my country guarantees to Tajik citizens the right to decide on their own religion and to choose a religion if they wish to do so, or not to follow any religious rite or religion and not to take part in any religious ceremonies. But over recent years, a law was adopted by our country that infringes upon the Constitution and which constrains this right and that violates that law. Now, this new law means that women who wear a hijab to go into public buildings or to study, to go to schools, hospitals, or kindergartens. The fact that these women who wear hijabs are publicly humiliated and insulted are all a sign that shows that there is no freedom. Certain religious committees and the police force women sometimes to take off their headscarves. The dictator Emomali Rakhmonov himself said that women who wear the hijab are ignorant and are almost non-human. Now, about 14,000 men were arrested by the police recently, and they were forced to shave off their beards. Young people under 18 years of age cannot go into mosques or to follow religious classes abroad. Tajik citizens, for example, do not have the right to organize religious marriages. They must have a limited number of guests at weddings, etc. We believe that they say that they are fighting extremism and terrorism, but that's just an excuse. This is just
the Regional Center of Human Rights, to be followed by Human Rights Center Memorial. Thank you.
Dear Chairman, representatives of the OSCE participating countries and colleagues. Acts committed with intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnic, racial or religious group by deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part are defined as genocide according to the UN Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. We assert that situation with one of the religious minorities in Crimea, the Orthodox Church of Ukraine, OSCE, is bordering with genocide since it leads to the destruction of a religious group as a social community. Now, Ukrainian church religious minority in Crimea facing a real threat of complete elimination and requires immediate support from the global community. Specifically because to adhere to the Ukrainian church in Crimea in opposite to the Orthodox Church of Moscow Patriarchate remains one of a few opportunities to preserve Ukrainian identity in the occupied territory. In 2014, Russian authorities explicitly seized the temples of OSCE in Sevastopol city and Perivalno village. The church premises were handed over to the Church of Moscow Patriarchate. In the end of the first year of occupation, only 11 of 45 parishes of OSCE continued their existence. To date, there are 8 temples of Crimean Eparchy of OSCE in the occupied peninsula. One of them, situated in Eupatoria city, makes up just 20 square meters. Still, in 2019, the occupying powers have ordered to destroy this temple. The main church of Crimean Eparchy of OSCE, the Cathedral of Sacred Equal Apostles St. Prince Volodymyr and St. Princess Olga, is also in jeopardy now. This temple has sheltered parishioners from the other communities which had already been dissolved. Several weeks ago, on the 29th of August, the Russian court issued a decision on the eviction of the Crimean Eparchy of the OSCE from the cathedral. The judgment has been implemented. What is more, before the court had ruled the case, in June 2019, Russian authorities semi-seized the temple, pretending they intended to renovate the building, even though that was not necessary. In fact, they have been destroying it. That proved once again the use of hybrid methods by Russia along with official policies and practices of the state. Thus, during the occupation, the actions of Russia led to the destruction of thousands of parishes of OSCE in Crimea. Now the authorities began to demolish the remaining, which will lead to the complete elimination of this religious community on the peninsula. Therefore, an immediate response from the OSCE members and the global community is required in order to stop and prevent complete destruction of the Ukrainian religious congregation in Crimea. We urge governments and international organizations to condemn the actions of the Russian Federation aimed at dissolution of Crimean Eparchy, to require from Russia to comply with its obligation as an OSCE participating state and according to international law, and to demand to stop the seizure of the cathedral.
Thank you. Just, sorry, you're just out of time, but please submit your recommendations to the documents distribution desk. We will now hear from Human Rights Center Memorial, followed by NGO Sadokat. Thank you.
Добрый день, уважаемые господа.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. In 2003, the Supreme Court of the Russian Federation recognized Hizb ut-Tahrir, that international organization, as a terrorist organization. It did not cite any evidence which it based its decision on. So the Russian Federation became the only country in the world which has proclaimed Hizb ut-Tahrir a terrorist organization. It is alleged that these terrorist organizations are trying to overthrow the constitutional order. And very often, very long sentences are meted out for being involved in such organizations, up to 24 years. Over 276 people have been sentenced to time in prison, although none of these criminal cases put forward any evidence. None of these people who were accused and then sentenced had any weapons. None of them were plotting any violent action. The only evidence used was the interpretation Hizb al-Tahrir gives to Islam. In Crimea, very often Crimean Tatars are being charged on these grounds. Over 60 Crimean Tatars are therefore behind bars at the moment. Thus, accusations of preparing terrorist plots on the grounds that you belong to this supposedly terrorist organization, this goes against OSCE principles. Thus, we call for this law to be revoked, the law which, the decision which decided that Hizb al-Tahrir members were part of the terrorist organization. We call on participating states of the OSCE to urge the Russian Federation to uphold its international commitments. Thank you.
Thank you. Next to speak, NGO Sarogat, followed by the Holy See.
Ladies and gentlemen, this time I am speaking as a former member of the terrorist organization, the Islamic Renaissance Party, as I served as secretary of that organization for several years. As a member of that party, I understood that the party's founders were pursuing inhumane objectives. Their key objective is getting involved in politics. They want to seize power. In order to achieve their objective, they try to sow the seeds of division in society, which is at odds with the holy book, the Quran. These activities have resulted in instability reigning in my country and my region. This party has also sown discord amongst Muslims, the Muslim community. Members of that party have not been able to reel in their activities, engaging in peaceful action. The latest events have shown that one of the members, the former members of this party, in fact, has committed murder and committed treason against his nation. Another member of that party, a fellow countryman, became a member of ISIS together with other members of his family. He's currently in Mosul, in the Islamic Republic of Iraq. He's taking part in hostilities on behalf of ISIS. Some Uzbeks living in my part of the country have become party members of this party, and then became members of a terrorist organization. Over 50 of these people are currently in Afghanistan, taking part in terrorist activities. Last but not least, I must say that it is the Islamic Renaissance Party operating in the Republic of Tajikistan that has spread Islamic fanaticism throughout the country, resulting in terrorist activities. And also
Completed your time allocated. So I will now call on the Holy See, and the Holy See will be followed by Serbia. Thank you.
Mr. Moderator, ever since it was explicitly mentioned in the seventh principle of the Helsinki Decalogue and evidenced by the fact that it has been reaffirmed and detailed in many other subsequent commitments, the protection of religious freedom has continued to occupy a central place in the comprehensive approach to OSCE to security. This explicit structural link between human rights and in particular freedom of religion and belief on the one hand and security on the other represent a unique feature of OSCE. It highlights awareness of freedom of religion and belief not only as a universal human right to be protected for itself, but also as a fundamental factor for the building and well-being of our societies, as well as for the creation of security within and between the participating states. The sum of the commitments adopted during the years demonstrates that freedom of religion and belief encompasses not only the right to manifest one's religion or belief on the individual and collective levels through worship, teaching, practice, and observance, but also to follow one's conscience in religious matters and to live coherently by manifesting one's beliefs in public without being coerced to conceal them. OSCE commitments enshrine not only the inviolability of individual conscience, but also the religious dimension in its specificity as a socially organized phenomenon. Consequently, the right of religious communities to exist as autonomous organizations is recognized in OSCE commitments. In this respect, my delegation welcomes again the guidelines on the legal personality of religions or beliefs communities, which represent a benchmark document at the disposal of those involved in drafting, reviving, and applying the relevant legislation. While the establishment of a registration mechanism for religious communities enabling these communities to function within the administrative and legislative parameters of a given state in accordance with the rule of law are clearly in line with the OSCE commitment, states should be vigilant that such mechanisms do not become in and of themselves a violation of the freedom of religion or belief. Moreover, it should always be kept in mind that in the regime that governs access to legal personality, participating states must also respect the autonomy of religious or belief communities. The concrete consequences of a failure
Thank
to
you.
understand-
So sorry, but just
Okay,
out of
I
time.
will submit the
Thank
full
you so much.
statement to the distribution list. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. Serbia and then Tajikistan, please.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Religious rights in Serbia, starting from the tradition that the right to freedom of thought, belief, and religion is guaranteed in the Republic of Serbia, everyone is free to express religion or belief by performing religious ceremonies, attending religious service, or teaching. For the Republic of Serbia, the fight against this intolerance, discrimination based on religion or belief, including members of all churches and religious communities, is of key importance. The Constitution of the Republic of Serbia states in Article 1, the state is based on the rule of law and social justice, the principles of civil democracy, human and minority rights and freedoms, and belonging to European principles and values. Article 21 of the Constitution states any discrimination, whether directly or indirectly, on any ground, and in particular based on race, gender, nationality, social origin, birth, religion, is prohibited. The state body in charge of religious issues in the Republic is the Directorate for Cooperation with Churches and Religious Communities, which belongs to the Ministry of Justice. There are 7 traditional churches and religious communities in Serbia, which make up 95% of the total population of our country. All registered churches and religious communities in the Republic of Serbia are promotion, peace, tolerance, and coexistence, and are invited to carry out their mission in order to prevent and suppress these related negative phenomena among citizens in Serbia. In 2001, the state of Serbia introduced religious education and a subject attended by primary and secondary school students, where lectures are proposed by churches and religious communities. In this way, children are educated through the education system on the principles of law, peace, tolerance, and coexistence. The government of the Republic of Serbia, through the Ministry of Education, finances the work of law of all religious teachers in Serbia. The Directorate for Cooperation with Churches and Religious Communities has initiated with the government of the Republic of Serbia the establishment of a sector for interreligious dialogue in order to promote interreligious dialogue between traditional churches and religious communities. In this regard, the results of the implementation show that religion rights in Serbia are based on the affirmation of religious and human freedoms and the promotion of the value, significance, and influence of religion in the society as a powerful factor in democratization and the process of European integration of our country.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Please submit any recommendations to the Documents Distribution Center. Next to speak is Tajikistan, and to be followed by the Church of Scientology Public Affairs and Human Rights Office. Thank you.
Distinguished participants, the Republic of Tajikistan recognizes all international standards on human rights, including with regard to the freedom of religion and belief. The Constitution of Tajikistan provides for the establishment of democratic rule of law and the equality of citizens irrespective of their religious or political views. Our experience has shown that it is a secular state which is a guarantor of stability and security in modern Tajikistan. As a member of the working group on the elaboration of laws for Tajikistan on the freedom of religion and religious associations, I can confirm that in the passing of the first reading of the first law, all 16 recommendations of ODIHR were accepted when the law was passed. The law established equal opportunities for religious associations for representatives of all religions and movements. So today in Tajikistan, we have over 4,000 religious associations, which includes nearly 80 associations of representatives of other religions and movements. For comparison's sake, during Soviet times in Tajikistan, we only had 17 mosques. I can inform you that with the support of the leader of our nation, the president of Tajikistan, in the city of Dushanbe, our capital, we will be opening the largest mosque of Central Asia for about 120,000 people. A very important achievement of Tajikistan is also providing for the rights of religious minorities, which the law provides for the rights of also those who do not believe. In conclusion, I wanted to say that limiting the work of extremist religious organizations and terrorist organizations which use religion for political aims cannot cover the religious rights of citizens because these organizations do not fall into the category of religious organizations per se. In this connection, we can say that countries that support terrorist and extremist organizations and help them to take part even at the most important conferences with OSCE will carry the responsibility for security in this region.
Out of time, but please, if you have any recommendations, do submit them to the Documents Distribution Center. Next is the Church of Scientology Public Affairs and Human Rights Office, to be followed by Scientologists Take Action Against Discrimination, Hungary. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. If I need to start by recommendations, my first recommendation is for German government, and it would be to stop the practice, the discriminatory practice that I'm going to denounce just after. And my second recommendation would be to respectfully ask ODIHR to assist in engaging with the German government on this topic with my church in a peaceful way. So in Germany, some lenders continue the use of so-called sect filters to ostracize Scientology and individual Scientologists and to prevent the private business activities of Scientologists and by prohibiting their involvement in normal economic life. These sect filters demand an individual to reveal any connection or affiliation with the Church of Scientology and requires the discontinuation of membership or resignation from Scientology, as otherwise no employment contract, service contract, or invitation to a government bid would be granted. You can neither refuse to sign it or lie on it. Sect filters not only apply to public contracts, as even a private company who would receive funds from state would have to make sure that all its employees and all its service providers would sign the sect filter and would themselves make sure it is signed by its employees. While the practice of the sect filter has already been recognized as illegal by German courts, it continues to be used currently by some lenders as Bavaria. This practice is a discriminatory practice which violates Germany's commitments to all international standards on freedom of religion or belief and non-discrimination. So, as I said, I would kindly ask ODIHR to investigate this matter and assist in establishing a real dialogue between the church and government in order to put an end to this discriminatory practice. And a full paper is uploaded on the HDIM website with all background and details about this practice, and I would strongly recommend its reading. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And now we'll hear from Scientologists Take Action Against Discrimination Hungary, followed by NGO Homa. Thank you.
Уважаемые дамы и господа,
Ladies and gentlemen,
distinguished panel, distinguished participants, in the annotated agenda of this session, there was a question raised: how does freedom of religion or belief facilitate peace and security? Where history has proven for us that any attempt to suppress the freedom of religion or belief eventually resulted in violence either from the side of the suppressed minorities or the ruling power. Thus, the contrary must also be true. We could see in the Hungarian history that right after communism collapsed, the thirst for freedom was so big in Hungary that the parliament voted for one of the most simple laws on freedom of religion and churches that led to 20 years of peace and tolerance in the field of religions, and it contributed also to security in general in Hungary. The new law on churches in Hungary in 2011 does not respect the international standards of freedom of religion and belief. We do love our country, and we do believe that the efforts of the Hungarian government to help persecuted Christians is very good, as well as the programs to support families and safeguard Christian values. As our Prime Minister stated on conference in the Hungarian Parliament last week, Christian freedom means that we will not do to others what we wouldn't like them to do to us. We respectfully fully ask ODIHR to help engaging a dialogue with the government so minority religions have the same rights as others. Thank you very much.
Thank you. NGO Homa, followed by Montenegro, please.
спасибо.
thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, each and every one of us has the right to exercise any religion they wish. All religions call on us to do good, but sometimes religion is used as a fig leaf covering vested interests, including the desire to seize power. This sows the seeds of discord in society. I live in Buchtar, in the Atlantic region, and I wanted to remind you about what happened in 1992, 1993. Hundreds of thousands of people in my region were killed by Islamic extremists. It was a tragedy. My family is one of thousands of families which, during the civil war in Tajikistan, we suffered at the hands of extremist and terrorist organizations. Unfortunately, today, speaking from this high rostrum here at the OECD, at the OSCE, the interpreter apologizes, people spoke and purported that they are protecting the glory of Tajikistan. My father, a teacher who spent many years teaching his students, was killed right outside our home. My brother, 18 years old, Hushad, militants from this terrorist party, they kept him in a cellar, then they brought him out and shot him many times. He was executed. 25 years old, my elder brother, he was also shot and thrown into the river. 4 of his children were left. They were orphaned. In 1992, thousands of people were robbed, they were tortured, they were killed. And everyone living in Buchtar, in Dvashko, and Kushmilsk, parts of my region, they can all attest to that. They were all witness to this horrible war where brother rose up against brother. Journalists, scientists, teachers, doctors, many other people banded together under the leadership of Said Baltoumani to set up this Islamist party. Then we saw a peace-building process. Our experience is singular. A key contribution to this process was made by the current president, Imam Ali Rahman. We will not allow for history to be repeated. Therefore, I ask you, those who spoke before me, why are you talking about human rights when you yourself violated the rights of thousands of people? How can you heal the wounds you have
We will now hear from Montenegro, followed by Ukraine.
Thank you, Chair.
Montenegro aligns with the joint statement of the EU, but please allow me to say through remarks in my national capacity regarding the recent development in this matter in Montenegro. Freedom of thought, conscience, and religion is guaranteed by the Constitution of Montenegro from 2007, while on the law level, by the law from 1977, adopted almost half century ago in the period of socialism. In May 2019, the government of Montenegro has adopted the draft of the law on freedom of religion or belief and the legal status of religion communities. This law, for the first time in Montenegro, would regulate a number of important issues such as the rights and obligation of religious communities, procedure of registration, issue of state property in a clear and transparent way, issue of religion education. All religion monuments are part of the cultural heritage of Montenegro are belonging to all citizens of Montenegro regardless of their religion. The draft law will guarantee every citizen of Montenegro the freedom of religion, whereby the state would protect property and cultural treasure belonging to all citizens and ensure that the laws of Montenegro apply equally to all throughout the entire territory of our state. In conclusion, allow me to emphasize that this law is drafted in accordance with the highest international standards, including the United States Convention, the EU Convention of Human Rights, the case law of the European Court of Human Rights, as well as the guidelines of the Venice Commission and the OSCE ODIHR 2004 and 2014. At this point, we are in the process of harmonization of this draft law with all stakeholders involved. Thank you.
Sorry, thank you. Next is Ukraine, to be followed by the regional public organization Youth Society of Tajik Students in St. Petersburg.
Thank you, Mr. Manocha. Providing and supporting religious freedom is a subject of the constant attention and care of the Ukrainian government. Internationally recognized index of the religious freedom offered by the Pew Research Center shows that during the last 5 years, index of the state limitation of the religious organizations for Ukraine has decreased from 4.2 level till 3.8. Just for understanding these figures, we can compare Ukrainian index with the situation in just 2 other countries. One of them, for example, Belgium, has the same level, 3.8. At the same time, Russia, which is trying to accuse Ukraine in different types of violations of the religious rights, has an index which is lower in more than 2 times than the Ukrainian one, 8.1. So, Ukraine permanently confirms its devotion to the idea of the equal and objective treatment of any religious organization. Despite the Russian occupation of Crimea and presence of the regular Russian troops at some districts of the Donbas area, Ukrainian society remains absolutely tolerant toward any religious communities, including those that have obvious Russian origins, and continue to preserve the direct subordination to the spiritual centers located in Russian Federation. Sometimes even vice versa. Among these communities with historical Russian roots, there are several ones, those free development in completely impossible or seriously limited because of the state limitation in the entire Russia. For example, part of the Russian Orthodox Church abroad, we denied its merging with the Moscow Patriarchate 12 years ago, seriously increased its traditional diocesan sediment in Odessa, which has become now a world administrative center in fact. Several groups of so-called Russian old right believers historically are inseparable part of the Ukrainian society. All kinds of privileges that state offer for any religious organization are also the subject of use by the Ukrainian Orthodox Church under canonical subordination of the Moscow Patriarchate. Just for the previous years, 2018, according to the official data of the church itself, this church has increased for 5 new bishops, 23 parishes, 7 monasteries, 89 monks and nuns, 123 other members of clergy. Thank you.
Out of time. Oh, thank you. Next is the regional public organization Youth Society of Tajik Students in St. Petersburg, and then Canada. Thank you.
Добрый день.
Good afternoon, distinguished participants. My name is Ambajam Nadhimov. I'm the head of the Regional Association Youth Students of Tajikistan. On behalf of our organization, I also wanted to draw your attention to certain important aspects with regard to religion in Tajikistan. For many years, we have been observing the organization of Islam Renaissance representatives, and we have established the following. The head of this group, some people were very close to the banned terrorist organizations that were very close to some other countries. This has been established by the New York Times from December of 2001, referring to the U.S. intelligence. The leader of the Islam Renaissance group had links to Al-Qaeda and other international terrorist organizations. Their main aim was to be a bridge between Tajikistan and to promote this ideology in Tajikistan. Currently, they have changed their name, and now they're speaking on behalf of NGOs. They are claiming to be victims who supposedly are being harassed, but their aims have not changed. The civil war in the 90s was due to such parties and organizations, which halted the development of our country for 2 decades. I am a patriot and a son of Tajikistan. We are the future, we are the youth, and we want our country to prosper. We wanted to say it was enough for us, for our fathers, to have gone through this difficult path. We will not stand for the new generation to make the same mistakes. We appeal to the leadership of the OSCE and to other international organizations. We need to put an end to support the members of terrorist organizations. I will reiterate. My recommendation is to verify all organizations who register here and who want to speak at international conferences. Thank you.
Thank you. Canada, followed by Forum 18. Thank you.
Thank you, Moderator. We would like to start by proposing the following 3 recommendations for this session. First, that ODIHR expand its training on its 2015 guidelines on the legal personality of religious or belief communities in order to assist participating states in overturning the onerous and opaque state registration procedures found in many parts of the OSCE region. Secondly, that participating states ensure that legislation pertaining to the registration of religious organizations embraces the principles of Article 18 of the ICCPR, and that legislation is not used to obstruct and curtail activities of religious communities, as we've seen in the case of Jehovah's Witnesses in Russia and some parts of Central Asia. And finally, that participating states respect the right of those individuals who wish to change their religion or belief, hold no belief, or ascribe to so-called non-traditional beliefs or religions. Moderator. Canada's approach to promoting and protecting freedom of religion or belief is grounded in our efforts to foster greater inclusion and respect for diversity, both within Canada and abroad. The freedom to believe or not believe, and to choose one's religious beliefs freely, is a central component of such diversity and inclusion. Individuals who are free to express their identity and practice their faith, or withhold from practicing a faith in safety and security, are also free to contribute to the economic, cultural, and political developments of their country. In short, we are collectively stronger when people can freely believe or not believe without fear of repression or oppression. The reality, however, is that religious persecution continues to grow globally, including in the OSCE region. This persecution is multifaceted, but includes directed government intervention in the form of favoritism of religious groups, limits on religious activities of minority groups, and the fanning of religious intolerance for political gain. In light of this reality, and as participating states, we must work together through our multilateral institutions to ensure religious minorities are protected. At its core, this means continuing to staunchly defend universal human rights as well as the integrity of the rules-based international order. Canada is not perfect, however, as discrimination and hate exist in our society too. amongst those who reject others' beliefs or religions. We must be willing to stand up to the growing discrimination and xenophobia facing many of these communities. We are working to combat this scourge of intolerance, and we will be speaking in greater detail to our efforts towards countering discrimination in working session 13 next week. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next is Forum 18 and then the SOVA Center for Information and Analysis. Thank you.
Thank you. My full text and recommendations are on the distribution system. Recommendations. Participating states, OSCE institutions and field operations and civil society could monitor and analyse in concrete terms violations of everyone's freedom of religion or belief and the interlinked freedoms of expression, assembly and association, including using an inclusive gender perspective. To mainstream work within an all human rights for all perspective. To insist that the most effective step to ensure security is to fully implement the human dimension commitments. And finally, to use tools such as the ODIHR Freedom of Religion and Belief and Security Policy Guidance. Moderator. Full respect for freedom of religion or belief is at the core of the OSCE's comprehensive concept of security. As Dr. Shahid in 2017 stressed, the right to freedom of religion or belief and the right to equality are intimately linked. Serious form violations by participating states or with official complicity send a signal undermining social traditions, giving a kind of limited protection to women. For example, in patriarchal Kyrgyz society, any insult or attack on women is seen as far more serious than a similar insult or attack on men. Yet before a church was in January 2018 burned down, young men publicly threatened Baptist women. The arson followed increasing threats and violence against smaller vulnerable groups where police openly sympathized with attackers. Serious form violations invariably take place in highly patriarchal societies where gender equality is not a lived reality, where people cannot express different identities and opinions openly, and where the rule of law is weak. As former UN Special Rapporteur on for Basma Jahangir commented, when I'm asked which belief community is persecuted most, I always reply, human beings. And as Fiona Ny-Ollen, the UN Special Rapporteur on the promotion and protection of human rights and fundamental freedoms while countering terrorism, said in May on her Kazakhstan country visit, the use of extremism laws against political groups and critical voices is a worrisome practice and detracts from the genuine and much-needed work globally of addressing terrorism challenges. The challenge we face is this: how can we foster genuine security by giving everyone what the OSCE Joint Guidelines on the Legal Personality of Belief Communities calls the dignity they deserve as members of the human family? Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. The SOVA Center for Information Analysis is next, to be followed by the Azerbaijan Press Council.
Distinguished Mr. Moderator and participants of the conference, I also will start with our recommendations. Once again, we call on the Russian authorities to review the decision on banning the Jehovah's Witnesses organization and other religious associations and to stop the practice of prosecuting citizens for their beliefs. To also to cancel the amendments of Yaravoy Azurova limiting missionary actions, and also to review the policy with regard to new religious organizations and Protestantism. Now, with regard to, in detail, to certain areas in the era of freedom of belief. Now, the rising repressions against the Jehovah's Witnesses that we talked about a great deal today, this is one of the most important issues in the sphere. Unfortunately, in Russia, other groups of religions are on the list of banned organizations, which is illegal. This is Muslims who are part of Salida Nursi movement, but others as well. In Kazan, 5 people, for example, who are part of a peaceful Muslim organization, Fasr Maif, were sentenced to 5 to 7 years imprisonment this summer. Amongst them were the elderly. The amendment Yaravoy Azurova, which limits missionary activities, is one of the main instruments to pressure religious organizations. However, the Russian Federation Supreme Court analyzed 550 administrative cases of the so-called illicit missionary work did not reveal any violations of the Constitution. Now, this is not only with relation to Protestant churches or other religious groups, but also to traditional religions. For example, illicit missionary work has also been applied to Jewish and Muslim and Buddhist organizations. The land code is often used by Russian officials to put pressure on the Protestant church. The full text of my statement will be distributed. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. Azerbaijan Press Council, to be followed by the Committee for the Protection of Rights of the Crimean Tatar People.
Спасибо. Меня зовут
Thank you. My name is Azerasvet. I will be telling you a little bit about what's happening in Azerbaijan. A number of years ago, a group of Jews from the United States of America came to Azerbaijan. They met with the President of the Republic, and their leader told our President that Azerbaijan is the best country there is in the world for Jews. That means that in Azerbaijan we've never had any anti-Semitism. There are synagogues, there are churches, and of course there are mosques which coexist side by side, and there aren't any problems. So having heard representatives of European countries make statements, I was taken aback to see that none of them, not even the EU, mentioned the main problem in European countries. That is the so-called Pegida organization. Day after day, that organization calls for Muslims to be expelled from Europe. Why is it that European countries, which look at Azerbaijan with a magnifying glass, why are they sitting idly by, not talking about this? Why is it that representatives of this organization, why is it that they're allowed to become politicians, now sitting in the Bundestag? How can Europe put up with this? Moreover, I wanted to say that my country, Azerbaijan, is a model of tolerance and multiculturalism. Never before has anyone in my country called for the expulsion of any religious community. Furthermore, I should like to say that in neighboring Armenia, which did expel all Muslims from its territory starting in 1988, why is it that they're continuing persecuting Muslims, trampling on their values? They're destroying mosques, they're destroying Muslim cemeteries, and this is happening not only in Armenia. On top of what they're doing in their own country, they're also doing on the territories, Azerbaijani territories, which they've occupied. I call on representatives of all OSCE participating states to take this into account. Thank you.
Thank you. The Committee for the Protection of Rights of the Crimean Tatar People is next. And then we will return to the Center for Human Rights Studies, Akjavik, who were on the list and due to speak much earlier, but were not in the room at the time they were called, or certainly didn't speak at the time they were called. If they are here, we will hear them following the Committee for the Protection of the Rights of the Crimean Tatar People.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, having occupied Crimea in 2014 in violation of international law, Russia began systemic violations of human rights. Russian representative practices are gaining more and more momentum. Searches, arrests, detentions are not single episodes anymore, but systemic and institutionalized. Every day, human rights defenders record dozens of cases of human rights violations throughout Crimea, including violations of freedom of religion. The occupation power is trying to find more and more artificial reasons for the arrest of completely innocent people, accusing them of crimes that they have never committed. Here are just some examples registered by us over the first half of 2019. On January 18, on the eve of Friday prayer, riot police arrived in the mosque in Dubki village of Simferopol region. They tried to substitute the imam. On March 17, in Sarasu, Belogorsk, there was an attempt to prevent a prayer service dedicated to illegally convicted political prisoners and the missing during the occupation period of Crimea. On March 27, the Russian authorities in occupied Crimea prematurely terminated the lease agreement for the premises which houses the only Ukrainian Orthodox church on the peninsula. The Arbitration Court of Crimea ordered the church to return the premises to the Ministry of Property and Land Relations. On April 15, in the village Turmavoye, Baglalklava, police officers of the Federal Security Service of the Russian Federation, as well as the officers of the Ministry of Internal Affairs, searched the house of Imam of local mosque, Rustem Abilev, after which he was detained and arrested. Under the guise of fighting against terrorist organizations and their leaders, the occupation authorities are fighting against decent and socially active citizens. The so-called Crimean authorities continue to regularly conduct searches in the households of Crimean Tatar and Ukrainian activists. Most of the searches carried out in the first half of 2019 were related to alleged participation in organizations prohibited in the Russian Federation, Hizb ut-Tahrir and Jehovah's Witnesses. The largest number of searches was recorded in March and in June 2019, when security officials massively searched 26 and 8 houses of the Crimean Tatars on suspicion of participating in the Hizb ut-Tahrir organization, banned in Russia, and 9 houses of representatives of the Jehovah's Witnesses organization. Since the beginning of the occupation of Crimea, Russia has prosecuted 63 Crimeans for allegedly participating in or organizing the activities of Hizb ut-Tahrir. 50 of 63 have already been illegally transferred to the territory of the Russian Federation. 13 were sentenced to a term of 5 to 17 years in high-security prisons. We recommend Russian Federation to release all political prisoners persecuted in the so-called Hizb ut-Tahrir case as soon as possible. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. I should just mention at this stage that if there are any participating states who wish to exercise their right of reply, please indicate your wish by coming up to us at the head table. And then we'll take those towards the end of the session. Now, is the Center for Human Rights Studies, Akjovic, in the room, please? Because now is your final chance to speak. No, I don't see anyone. I apologize if I mispronounced. Oh, you are here. Okay.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. The freedom of religion in Kazakhstan. Based on the recommendations my fund has come up with, it came up with at the last meeting of the OSCE, in fact, the government of Kazakhstan has taken steps to prevent the arbitrary application of legislation by switching from punitive measures towards more advocacy and prevention. And we've seen the effects of that. There are fewer sanctions being imposed on religious minorities. However, there are other problems which have had a negative impact on interreligious harmony and public security. For the first time, local representatives of the international religious organization, Jehovah's Witnesses, their activities, in fact, prompted a mass outpour of discontent in Almaty, Aktobe, Kostanay, Taraz, and Shymkent. In Aktobe, we managed to prevent assaults being perpetrated against Jehovah's Witnesses because the police intervened. The reason why they were attacked is that there's growing discontent because of the bothersome propaganda Jehovah's Witnesses disseminate in public places. Given that most Kazakhstanis espouse traditional Islamic and Orthodox Christian views, it is possible that religious tensions may boil over if Jehovah's Witnesses persistently convert or attempt to convert Muslims and Orthodox Christians to their faith. The problem is that the freedom of religion is being scuppered because there are no regulations governing religious leaders' ability to prevent minors from taking part in services if one of the minors' parents object. This rule is questionable, and some groups think it's groundless. However, in our view, there are objective reasons for the outrage of these religious organizations when sanctions are imposed on them. In light of the above, what we recommend is for the governing board of the international religious organization, Jehovah's Witnesses, to review their approach to organizing their religious activities in Kazakhstan, taking into account the attitudes and the traditional values espoused by people in Kazakhstan. The government of Kazakhstan needs to amend legislation so as to rule out groundless punishments being meted out to religious leaders if their religious events are attended by minors without their parents knowing about it. Thank you very much. I also wanted to invite you all at 6:15 tonight to a conference we're hosting. Thank you.
To the documents distribution center. So the other speaker, or the other participant that didn't speak when they were called, was the public political movement Vatandor. Are they now in the room and available to speak? The public political movement Vatandor. Is their representative in the room? Yes, is that you, sir? No, okay.
I'm also in waiting list.
Okay, well, we're in the position where we've come to the end of the speakers list. We have 2, maybe 3 rights of reply. And we have a reserve list of 13. Now, I'm not going to propose to call 13. What I will suggest is that we hear from 2 of the next 2 on the speakers list, and then I will call on Dr. Ahmad Shahid to offer 5 or 6 minutes of concluding comments and closing reflections, and then we'll take the rights of reply. So we'll move forward on that basis. So the Institute of Young Democrats, are you in the room? Problem is, of course, that many of these, or quite a number of these, may not have expected to be called, so we'll just keep working down the list. The Office of the Commissioner of Human Rights, for Human Rights of the Republic of Azerbaijan?
Yes.
Is here, okay, off you go.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator, for opportunity to share our experience also. Ladies and gentlemen, today freedom of religion has been fully respected in the Republic of Azerbaijan, and Azerbaijan as a multinational and polyconfessional state supports the principles of unity and diversity. And we are proud that there was not any case of intolerance and discrimination on the ground of ethnic belonging, religion, language, and culture at any stage of century-old history of Azerbaijan. Now, there are a number of various models of multiculturalism, but the multiculturalism models which is presented to the world by Azerbaijan is approved and takes root as a model for many progressive states of the world. The multiculturalism which has turned into a state policy appears an invariable lifestyle in modern Azerbaijani society. On the backdrop of all this, unfortunately, we see a dangerous tendency, Islamophobia trends in Europe and in the West in general. The prejudiced attitude, biases toward Muslims or simply against the people of the Islamic world is widely occupying the public opinion and a public life crossing the domestic level. Today, some Western countries are attempting to bring restrictions at legislative and legality levels to those who try to live in accordance with Islamic rules, including citizens of these countries. The freedom of cohesiveness to any religions as one of the most fundamental is reflected in all major human rights instruments. Such questions can rise on how to avoid these dangerous trends. Nevertheless, this has a simple answer. The answer will be treating fundamental human rights and freedoms not a theoretical, abstract concept, but as a one requiring a realistic, practical approach, and also through understanding the diversity of the world, the difference among people, the different world outlook and norms.
Thank you very much. We didn't start the clock when you started, so I apologize for that, but you are sadly now out of time. But if you have any recommendations, do please submit them
I have a
to
recommendation, but unfortunately, my 30 seconds.
No, because we started the clock after you spoke.
Okay. But
so
my fully statement
if you can,
will
provide it to the
publish.
documents distribution
Okay.
center.
Thank you very much for the opportunity again.
So we now have 6 rights of reply. In light of that, I think we will conclude the speakers list to enable us to hear from Dr. Shahid for about 5 minutes. So I'll call on our introducer, Dr. Ahmad Shahid, for his closing comments and reflections. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. It's been quite sobering to listen to the testimonies from around the room about the range of violations of freedom of religion or belief that affect the countries in this region. Half my travels have been to this region. I'm not saying that this region is disproportionately covered in the violations, but also partly because no country is free from trouble, but also because this region, I believe, offers an opportunity to work on this theme to address issues that have been raised. Some of the issues raised speak to the violations of the core content of the right to freedom of religion or belief. Issues about coercion, issues about blasphemy laws, apostasy laws, issues about not recognizing the autonomy of religious institutions, the suppression or suppression of some of the basic elements covered, core elements covered in the right to freedom of religion or belief, which is quite distressing to hear. But I think there's also an element of disproportionate imposition of limitations regime, which may or may not come from a deliberate attempt to do so, but may also be linked to the struggle many states face in trying to balance competing interests which center around freedom of religion or belief. So there is, again, I think, the need to invest in clarifying the concepts that are covered by freedom of religion or belief, clarifying precisely what the scope of the right is, what are the different ways in which that right has to be respected by authorities, and also the range of limitations that is permitted, and also under what conditions and to what extent they may be applied. I think there is a tendency across the board that when a practice based on religion tends to affect public safety or national security, to respond to that with the toughest security measures possible. This would be an error. It's clear that from the limitations of the regime that restrictions must be narrowly tailored and must be the exception, and they must in any case not be discriminatory either in intent or effect, and nor should that actually destroy the right itself. So there should be a very targeted, very narrowly tailored, careful application of limitations to do that. At the same time, there is the failure to apply the restrictions on some practices. Now, if you look at the ICCPR, Article 5 provides a limitation on what can be done with any of the rights proclaimed in the agreement, in the covenant. That is to say that none of the rights in the covenant can be exercised to a degree more than that is proclaimed in the covenant. So if you look at the ICCPR Article 18, it is not possible to invoke Article 18 to carry out practices that undermine the rights of women and gender equality. So religious arguments have to stop at the point where they interfere with the rights of others. I've been told I have 1 minute left. I want to come to the most important point I wish to make. That is to say that we must also focus on the positive contribution religion can make to enhancing public safety and security. The notion of comprehensive security provides us an opportunity to look at how we can engage with faith-based communities and non-religious communities to ensure that we can build, first of all, broad coalitions. We can go beyond polarization to engage with, to develop empathy, to go beyond zero-sum thinking into positive-sum thinking. The core elements that have been at the heart of the comprehensive security concept. So I think applying that concept to freedom of religion or belief can be very helpful in ensuring we can address many of the core issues we have heard about, and also using it as a positive resource to address the problems and pitfalls we face. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Shahid. So we will now hear from Tajikistan, Russian Federation, Ukraine, Armenia, and Germany, who are exercising their rights of reply. Have 2 minutes, and we'll start with Tajikistan, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I would like to use the right of reply to respond to what the extremist organization Group 24 has said. And supposedly in Tajikistan, we punish people for wearing the hijab and parajab. In Tajikistan, we have never had any bans or any kind of legal liability for wearing a beard or a hijab. Some of our NGO representatives who have spoken here wear beards, and no one has said anything to them. I also wanted to say that our president has never, ever said anything about women being reprehensible for wearing a hijab. That's ridiculous. It's liable. Now, organizations who promote wearing certain clothing or wearing beards don't necessarily pertain to radical movements. Now, somebody who is actually a radical said that we have such bans in Tajikistan. I also wanted to note that in our laws, there are no prohibitions from learning about religion abroad. Hundreds of thousands of people study abroad. But in order for them not to be victim to radical movements, we do have certain rules for getting your education abroad. This is done on bilateral agreements amongst our schools and states with regard to religious education. Thank you.
Thank you. And now the Russian Federation, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. We wanted to clarify, informing all OSCE participating states and other meeting participants that Hizbut Tahrir has been prohibited not only in the Russian Federation but also in Germany, China, Egypt, Turkey, Pakistan, and all of the Arab countries except Lebanon, Yemen, and the United Arab Emirates. While we're on the topic, the European Court of Human Rights at one point decided not to consider a case brought by Hizbut Tahrir in Germany, stating that according to the European Convention on Human Rights, this application was not applicable as terrorist organizations cannot enjoy the protections of the convention. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ukraine is next.
Thank you, Mr. Manocha. Ukrainian delegation wants to emphasize the impressive level of intolerance that we can hear even during this session. What is more dramatic, that we hear obvious insults from the representative of the official delegation. I mean several statements made by the Russian delegation with conscious manipulation and insolence concerning the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of Ukraine. In fact, we have obvious facts of public manifestation of intolerance and even denial of the right to exist for the entire religious organization. In this context, some statements made today by the representative of the Moscow Patriarchate, Deacon Shulga, concerning current religious policy of the Ukrainian government with the artificial positive evaluation sounds very comically, because in fact they presuppose not installing the principles of the real religious equality or tolerance, but confirming the declared and confessed by this church executive status. Also, concerning the second statement of the same person about the allegedly police investigation concerning the present here representative of the Ukrainian government. Necessity to emphasize, it is manipulation again. In fact, vice versa. The special trial and investigation had been started by the Special Service of Ukraine concerning one of the church representatives. In his attempt to stop or postpone the investigation, this person initiated formal alternative procedures which has to be initiated in any case according to Ukrainian legislation. Beside the director of the Department for Religious Affairs, the church representative decided to accuse also almost 10 other people, including experts, policemen, and even prosecutors. Thank you.
Thank you. I've just been informed that Armenia wishes to speak at the end, so Germany, would you like to take the floor, please? Exercise your right to reply. Thank you.
Danke, Herr Moderator. Ich möchte auf 3 Punkte eingehen.
Thank you, moderator. I wanted to cover 3 points. First and foremost, the Church of the Almighty God. We spoke about this before this session. Thank you for the information you provided. We are going to transmit that information. And let me assure you that we will look at each case individually. I'm referring to the situation in China specifically. We will take into account the circumstances you described when considering whether to grant asylum. Next, Scientology, the persecution faced by Scientologists. As you know, the Church of Scientology is not considered to be a religious community in Germany. As for public tenders, they occur on the basis of material criteria, on the basis of the principles of non-discrimination and equality. Pegida, my next point. Let me remind you that not all parties are members of the government, even if they do hold a seat in the Bundestag. So unless they're a prohibited organization, their representatives can, of course, stand for election to the Bundestag. As for Pegida, yes, they're representatives of the party, but this does not amount to the federal government. The federal government abhors all kinds of extremism, radicalism, and terrorism. We are combating violent extremism very actively, painstakingly, if you will. The criminal police have collated data, and in fact, information on hate crime is covered by statistics since 2017. Even more granular statistics has been gathered. We've also seen anti-Muslim crime. We have, in fact, observed various activities aimed at promoting democracy and tolerance. These are backed by the federal government. And there's information about that on the federal government's website. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now Armenia, please.
Thank you, moderator. It's regretful to see how an Azerbaijani NGO voiced groundless accusations against my country, Armenia, which promotes adherence to international human rights instruments and firm commitments to ensuring freedom of religion. Armenians know what it means to be a persecuted religious group. That's why it is a duty for us to pledge support for all those who are persecuted, including on the basis of their religion and belief. Armenia became a safe haven for a number of vulnerable religious minorities, including Yazidis and Assyrians. Today, Yazidis are the strongest minority group in Armenia, and we're proud that the biggest temple of this ancient people very soon will open in the Armenian homeland. Together with the most ancient Christian churches of the world and magnificent Blue Mosque of Yerevan, it will symbolize beauty of faith and tolerance. Meanwhile, almost all international human rights watchdogs continuously report on the appalling situation of human rights in Azerbaijan, where the dictatorial government exercises control over all spheres of public life. With regard to the religious freedom conditions, there are grave concerns about the mandatory registration requirements, imprisonment and torture of individuals for their beliefs, closure of places of worship, confiscation of religious materials which had not received the government approval, restrictions on the distribution of religious literature, and many others. Given these facts, thoroughly instructed Azerbaijani Gongos in this room should stop manipulating the public opinion with repeated false claims of tolerance in their country. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Now call on Azerbaijan, which is exercise their right to reply.
Just regarding, okay. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. It's not surprising that while replying to the NGO from Azerbaijan, Armenian delegates use again this opportunity to attack the government of Azerbaijan. First, I would like to mention that it's disrespectful to differentiate between the NGOs and calling them Gongo. It's really disrespectful in this whole. Armenia occupied 20% of territories, Azerbaijani territories, and expelled almost 1 million Azerbaijanis from the occupied territories as well as from the Armenia, and they carried out ethnic cleansing and different war crimes, various war crimes against Azerbaijanis. And it's normal for the Azerbaijani NGO to mention its discontent with this policy of Armenia. It's natural, so it's disrespectful to call the NGO Gongo. Coming to the grounded accusations of Armenian delegation, multiculturalism is one of the distinct features of Azerbaijan, and it's enough to say that almost 100,000 Armenians are living in Azerbaijan, while there is no single Azerbaijani living in Armenia. Even all of them was expelled from their own territories in Nagorno-Karabakh and 7 adjacent districts of Azerbaijan, where there was thousands and millions of Azerbaijan living. And we are supporting the principles of tolerance, and the Armenian church in Azerbaijan, not only preserved but also renovated by the Azerbaijani government. And in 2010, the Catholicos Karakin II, the head of the Armenian Gregorian Church, they visited this church and prayed in this church. So Armenian delegation doesn't touch upon how they carried out ethnic cleansing in Azerbaijan occupied territories, how changed they all mosques and historical and religious sites into warehouses and depositories, how they totally destroyed these religious sites. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you. There are no other participating states who wish to exercise their right of reply, so that concludes that. So now it's my duty to bring this session to a close, to remind participants that please leave your headsets and receivers in the room, to thank you all for your kind attention and contributions, to thank the interpreters for their excellent work, and finally, to thank our introducer, Dr. Ahmad Shahid, for his outstanding contributions to this session. One point struck me in particular, in that the notion, the concept of comprehensive security that the OSCE has pioneered invites the contribution of all actors. But in the case of the subject under discussion, freedom of religion, belief and security, the specific contribution of religious or belief communities to create the conditions for broad-based sustainable security. That is a theme of the new ODIHR publication on freedom of religion or belief and security that will now be launched in this room in 15 minutes' time. You are most welcome to attend. I can confirm that Dr. Shahid will be one of the speakers. I can also confirm that very good refreshments will be made available. That was not included on the flyer. For that, I apologize. So we look forward to seeing you all here at 6:15. Thank you very much.